few sponsors tonight. We'll get to some later on, but starting off are our friends at Pet Club.
Science proves that a healthy immune system is the body's first defense against the smallest of ailments to the most catastrophic. Coriolus versicolor is the most sought-after, all-natural supplement for both humans and pets to help boost the immune system. There are over 400 studies worldwide on its effectiveness in humans, including Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, MD Anderson Cancer Center, and now from the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine. Together, we can help reverse this terrible tide now plaguing your loved ones and give them the immune-boosting supplements that they need.
All right, thank you to our friends at Pet Club. Hope you guys are doing good in the audience. I'm doing pretty good myself. Things are feeling pretty discombobulated out there, but the more discombobulated they get, the more comfortable I feel and the more entertained I am. I'm not going to bitch in 2026 because in 2025, many of you know, on both the narrative and on the Devolution Power Hour, I was lamenting the fact that I felt like the writing of whatever was going on in what we're looking at was subpar, which is not to say that things were inherently bad or good. It's just that I found them boring. And in 2026, I don't think things are inherently bad or good, but I also do not think they are boring. I think the writing has been great. I think we had some new writers enter the writing room. I do believe things are being made intentionally absolutely absurd. I am not 100% sure that that is having the intended effect that I would have thought it would have had on more people than just me and maybe 3 other people that I've met in the world. But before I bring my guest on tonight to get into a bunch of stuff, I have a bunch of notes, but this is the type of guest who means I'm probably not going to address any of my notes, and that's a good thing. I'm going to show a short clip from said guest, but a recent past version of him that I was watching earlier today, and I thought would set us up well, just to make sure if there's anybody in the audience who has feelings that could be hurt, let's just hurt them right away, rip the Band-Aid off, and then we can make sure nobody else's feelings are hurt after this. Okay.
This as well, okay? You find the narrative boundary where there exists both the strong consensus belief in something we can't prove and the presence of gatekeepers enacting struggle sessions to cause severe reputational punishment for breaking consensus, all right? You may have seen it on Devolution Power Hour on Saturday night. I was talking, just saying normal, obvious things about the fakeness of our elections and whether or not it made any sense to vote or whether there might be other better strategies rather than convincing each other to vote and donating to political parties and wasting our time on this self-deluding psyop that we know as elections. And people went absolutely crazy having struggle sessions. Okay. It's all that I'm a bad person or that I want to sacrifice the country to these Democrats, just whatever stupid shit it always is. These people have no arguments. They've never had any arguments. We're 5 years into this process. They've never presented a good one. I've talked about this stuff from 2022, and they're still out there saying, vote hard, vote hard. Okay. That's gatekeeping. They are trying to do with emotional manipulation, with struggle sessions, and with reputational damage, what they can't actually accomplish by convincing people with things that make sense. Okay. So sorry. Not going to take you seriously. And it doesn't matter.
It's a good one. Good way to end. And before I bring my guest on a present version of himself, or at least I assume it's a present version of himself, I also want to piggyback that clip, which is from imyourmoderator.substack.com. That's from Chris's podcast. He's had it on hiatus because he's been writing a book, but every once in a while when people get too retarded, he comes out there with a special episode. But I thought this clip sort of reminded me of how I feel like things are going right now in the truth community. I think these clips are related. So, anyway, that's my own brand of autism. Welcome to the show, Chris. Been a little while. How's it going?
Yeah. I mean, it's going good. That clip was hilarious. I feel like I've been in that situation a number of times, not as either participant, just watching
Right.
people on drugs do silly things.
Yeah, I think what got me about that one was I mean, it's not crazy to see somebody strung out on whatever she's on acting like
She's
that.
high on life, man.
Yeah, yeah. But the end of the clip is what gets me. When she recognizes, hold on a second, there is a man holding this pigeon that is doing this to me and convincing me that this pigeon was acting of its own accord. And I don't know, it made me think of the truth community right now, of maybe people that think they are in a place that they're not. And I don't know, this is a very broad way of talking about this and setting this up. I didn't get through the whole thing, but I was watching a show of yours from March when you were talking about just, the reality divide and all this kind of stuff that we'll talk about tonight. But I guess to start off with, it feels like the info war is maybe in a different place than a lot of people who know what that is or use that terminology thought it would be at this point in time, like as broadly as possible that I can put that, because there's many different ways to define this stuff, even to define what the truth community is. But people watching this show use that kind of terminology, right? People that follow us, people that follow Badlands, etc. And just broadly, I wonder whether or not you think that is the case, that we're in a different place right now than maybe a lot of people in this audience thought we would be, number one. And number two, whether you think that's about observational abilities, whether that's from the observer mindset or whether that's objective, whether that's we are literally in a different place than we would have been, or that it's a matter of perspective.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess that there would be some questions about the framing. It totally depends on where, what we mean by where we are in this process. I am firmly of the belief, and have been the entire time, that there is going to come a moment when there's like this massive, oh shit, it really is that. And at that point, something breaks. Like there's something undeniable that sweeps across a high enough percentage of the people who just aren't willing to commit themselves to what they already know. And they finally get to that point. And then it's that squishy middle that never wants to come down anywhere, never wants to be definitive about what they believe or what they stand for or any of that they are finally forced to choose a side one way or another. And then what we end up with is a very small percentage of people who realize that they are isolated in a way that they never thought possible. There's this mainstream kind of, I call it the central narrative often, this thing that's projected across society, and everybody is supposed to involve themselves with that. That is our underlying conceptual reality. We all share in that conceptual reality, and we might have our different beliefs and opinions and tastes. We might be interested in certain parts and ignore other parts entirely, but that's the thing that we share in. And everybody kind of clings to that because that's where our safety comes from. There are people leaving that. And at the point where enough people are willing to leave that conceptual reality behind because they all kind of collectively understand that it's bullshit, that drops. The collective conceptual reality will simply collapse under the weight of disbelief because it is upheld by the incentive structure and by the fact that everybody knows everybody else knows. That's what we all believe. When that illusion goes away, the whole thing can collapse in a moment. And so I always think it's a matter of trying to push that moment forward and have the maximum number of people be prepared for that when it happens.
Yeah, so this is going to be a broad show. Part of the reason I wanted to have Chris on this specific show at this specific time is I kind of want to think some of this stuff through out loud.
Cool.
And sometimes I think those are the best. Chris and I were going back and forth this week about just what we wanted to talk about, what I wanted to talk about. And I was having trouble articulating what I wanted to talk about, which is not common for me. I am not, as anybody who watches me with any regularity or reads my 10,000 word articles, words are not something that I find lacking in explaining what I'm thinking about or how I'm thinking. Usually it's the problem is usually too much going on in my head. Lately, I don't feel bad. I don't feel negative, but I feel like there is this thing going on in like what we call the truth community in particular that I've been trying to think about what it is lately. And I think it's most aligned with what you've been talking about for a long time. And maybe to start off with, when you're talking about this sort of moment, like this thing that needs to happen, it also reminds me of when you talk about we're begging to get the hose again, different ways of putting this. I think the reason, I think some people get a little annoyed, good-naturedly or not, when they feel like, if you're watching a show like this on purpose, you probably feel like you're in a place that quote-unquote normies are not, right? Like, yeah. If you're on Rumble, if you're following Badlands, if you've read Devolution, if you're subscribed to any of us, if you've been following Trump and the info war, Q drops, whatever it is, like, you've done a degree, probably, of cognitive work on the nature of reality as it's told to you that most people have not done. And I would concede that. I would say that that is probably true. And yet, it feels like a community that is defined de facto based on everybody in that community having done that. That community, this community, is not maybe where I thought they would be. Like, that could be about elections, that could be about these specific narratives, these specific arguments we have, the plan, what is the plan? We spend a lot of our shows talking about these things in specifics. But tonight I kind of want to drill down into the psychology of it on a macro level. And maybe the way I'd put it is, I think it's a little paradoxical where it feels like in some way, I think Ghost has been saying this. He's been saying some of his conversations in 2026 with quote unquote normies in his personal life have felt more progressive. When I say progressive, I mean useful, than his conversations with quote unquote truthers. Mm-hmm. Like normies are in like a different place maybe than he thought they were at in terms of having these discussions, which means that truthers are not in the place where some of us thought they would be. I would agree with that. I think that is true. And maybe my kind of lead off thought with it would be, I think if you're in a community that prides itself on, only getting here by recognizing that the central narrative, as you put it, is not real or should be questioned, maybe the negative side effect of that is that once you've figured that out to your confidence, you're susceptible to creating this kind of new formation of belief, this new consensus protocol, that is way more hardened than people that observe the central narrative, right? Like if you think, hey, I've graduated beyond, I know that there's a central narrative and I figured it out. And now I've escaped the matrix, which is why I named it the MAGA matrix. And that maybe if those people have not actually escaped the matrix, but they think that they have, it's ironically much more difficult to talk to them about certain things than it is to talk to people who have not escaped the matrix at all.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's part of what I was addressing in the gatekeeping clip that you showed there. That is just for the audience. That's part of a much longer presentation that I've been putting together since December, and I kind of gave it a run through to get a sense of what it felt like to speak it out loud and to go through the logic from beginning to end with an audience and see like what people bumped up against and the rest. And so I did that podcast episode there. But the idea with the gatekeepers is that they are the furthest out. They're the ones by the fence. but ultimately their purpose is to keep people inside the cage that they've always been in. They are meant to say halt to all the people attempting to leave and steer them back in on terms that they are willing to accept. The truth community thing, you and I talk, I think that you have talked about this with a number of people, and we've kind of gone back and forth about it a number of times over the last many years. But one thing that I think that you note quite often is that a lot of MAGA supporters kind of lucked their way into their MAGA identity by just being Republicans and voting for the person with an R next to his name. And I think that a lot of people have had the same entry into what might be called the truth community, insofar as that's a real thing, by virtue of having voted for Trump or responded to the Q posts or been MAGA or liked conspiracy theories or just, who knows, all sorts of non-traditional belief systems ended up taking some part in this amalgamation that has developed from 2020 or maybe even 2016 or 2015 till the point we find ourselves at now. And for a lot of those people, it was never actually about a search for truth. They were countercultural, perhaps. They were contrarians. They were disagreeable. They could see that something was wrong with the thought process of their friends and family. And a lot of people just simply gravitated toward the opposite end of a false spectrum that exists inside what I call the controlled opposition dynamic, okay, where every opinion in there is totally acceptable within the gated bounds of this controlled conversation. And it's enforced by the need for consensus. It's enforced by censorship. It's promoted through propaganda. It has gatekeepers. It has it's a defense system that cordons off a conversation so that opinions outside that conversation will never actually be mainstreamed until the cloistered conversation can properly contain and contextualize those outside viewpoints. So that these problems exist in the truth community, quote unquote, should not be surprising to anybody, because entering a community like that is not proof of breaking out of the normie sphere in the first place. Like, I hate to break it to Q people, but there are a hell of a lot of Q normies. And all of this is an epistemological problem that doesn't get solved by adopting new opinions. It only gets solved by returning to first principles and actually shedding the conditioning that allows us to believe in this falsely constructed conceptual reality in the first place.
Yeah, that last point you made is exactly what I want to drill into, because we say terms like this, first principles, etc. But I think that people end up using terminology like this as a shorthand without really spending time thinking about what that means. I think you actually said that pretty directly on that show that I had clipped earlier on your show. You had said something similar to that. But the accidental awakening thing is a point I've made for a long time, and the reason I've made that point. I mean, sure, a little bit of it is my like shit disturbing nature. I enjoy taking the shit of having been a quote unquote liberal in the Obama era. It doesn't bother me. I think it's even healthy to sort of take shit about that and be like, yeah, man, I was being a fucking retard. But I have found that early into my sort of info war run and really being embraced, honestly, by a lot of people in this audience, by a lot of people in John's audience, on True Social, all that kind of stuff. I have noted that there's a real undercurrent of people in the truth community who kind of recognize that the Bush era was bad and that there's some bad Republicans, but they're like, well, at least I was never a Democrat. And I used to joke about the accidental awakening point and saying, hey, a lot of people voted for Donald Trump by accident. When I was originally saying that, I really felt most people, I was accepting most people in the truth community from that. I was saying most MAGA voters, I would call them MAGA normies, they voted for a Republican. He happened to be kind of a renegade Republican, a punk rock Republican, but they voted for him because they were Republican. But I used to frame that kind of positively and saying, well, hey, there's different gateway. It's a gateway drug into the awakening. You know, Trump rode that Republican branding and ringed it of all it was worth. But I think in the last couple of years, it's become apparent to me that I needed to resuscitate that refrain and that joke about the accidental Trump voting, because a lot of people in the truth community, I think, are susceptible to that. And I think the problem is, when I look back, you know, and you were a former liberal as well, when I look back at voting for Obama and taking shit for it, I am earnestly looking at what I was thinking about in 2008 and 2012 and saying, I know why I thought the things I thought at that time, and that thinking was flawed. The way I was thinking was flawed. And when you talk about epistemology, it shouldn't be astounding to me, but it is astounding to me, I guess, that a community that defines itself based on information warfare, the knowledge that there is fifth generation warfare going on, and the baseline knowledge that we have all collectively or individually defected from a central narrative that you describe. Everyone watching this show would probably describe themselves that way. They realized there was a matrix. They removed themselves from that matrix. I'm not claiming everybody watching the show believes that they know everything. But what surprises me is most people, even watching the show, don't know what epistemology is. And the way I would describe that would be, the simplest way I would describe it, would be most people, including in the truth community, do not know why they believe the things that they believe. Mm-hmm. I think that's the cleanest way I would describe it. And I think that's a problem, because if a lot of people in the so-called truth community don't know why they think the things they do, or maybe worse, if they do know why they believe the things they do, and if they believe the things they do because they saw it in a Q drop or because Donald Trump told them it, I would argue that that is even worse. Not that those things are inherently wrong or bad, but if that is how you know things, and you have not learned anything beyond that of your own volition, you could be setting us up for a much more difficult pathway going forward. And that's why, and I guess maybe last point to pass it to you is, the weird positive that is a negative to some people that I see right now, you refer to it as the discombobulator. Trump himself refers to it as a discombobulator lately. But I think that Trump in 2026 is a lot more vulnerable in the narrative sense than most truthers thought he would be at this point in time. And I actually think that that is a opportunity. But I think it's what's kind of provoking some of this tension within the truth community, because you had a lot of trust the plan people who are still trusting super hard. And then you have doomers. And I feel like we occupy this kind of middle ground of saying like, hey, it could be the plan that you trust the plan people are being smacked around a little bit by the plan itself. I have not backpedaled at all in my respect for what I think Trump is doing. But I have backed off significantly of my estimation of where I thought a lot of people in the truth community were at on a mental basis, with this whole thing.
I would just say, I don't think, people should believe whatever they want to believe and whatever is appealing to them, because ultimately that's what we do. We can have a rationalization for a belief. And if we are diligent about applying a first principles kind of systemic approach to forming beliefs, and we know, hey, that belief didn't come from the right places. I believe it, but I'm not going to pin my future to it. It's about putting things in the proper perspective. We can have opinions, we can have tastes, we can have ways that we see the big picture that we know we can't prove, but we are, we believe that's what's going on. I have that, right? I can't prove my big picture view of the world is correct to another person if what they want from me is what they consider objective evidence, material evidence from the real world, or admissions from authority. We generally we are conditioned, I should say, to accept views that are approved of by the authorities. We look to a government agency to tell us whether or not something is safe to drink, for instance. You know what I mean? So we are putting all our faith in the government institution at that point. Now, sometimes we might not be dealing with big issues, and a doctor tells us something. The neighbor tells us how to get down the road to the place we've never been. There are times where it's totally fine and a shortcut to say, okay, you know what? I'm not going to exercise extreme forms of skepticism on this information I'm receiving from authority because the stakes aren't all that big. But if you are, for instance, testing the condition of your eternal soul against whether or not you think it's a good idea to bomb 20,000 people 10,000 miles away for reasons the TV told you, well, you might want to exercise a greater degree of skepticism and scrutiny about the claim. You know, it's about what judgments we're making on the basis of what claims and how those claims were formed. And so, you know, an appeal to authority is already, like, that is a very famous and common logical fallacy. And because we are conditioned to accept beliefs only from authority, we've essentially incorporated a logical fallacy into virtually everything we think, and it shows. So I think that that's the first half of, or that's to answer kind of the first half of what you were saying. I would say, in terms of Trump's narrative vulnerability, I don't know that he's even in any narrative danger to any extent more than Tom Cruise is in danger in Mission Impossible when he's like hanging from the plane. You know, he's still going to win at the end of the movie. And you kind of know that going in. And so you can see like, oh man, this is the part where the enemies close in. They're about to get him. The whole thing is going to fall apart. I'm on the edge of my seat. And so I think that there's some of that. And I think that Trump uses that. But the narrative, the sense of narrative danger, I think, is coming from the people you're describing whose reputations are at stake based on their ability to match the story they've been telling for all these many years to what is actually happening now, as the thing that's actually happening diverges from the story that they've been telling. And so I think that that's how I would respond to that. And, you know, on some level, man, the community and what people think at some point, I think that just has to kind of be left behind. Like, yeah, everything that they need is there. The body of work is complete. They can go back and view that body of work. They can come to these things on their own, which is ultimately how everybody eventually gets there, if they get there. But, you know, the idea that this is all about waking up the normies is something that left me years ago. And down the road from that, a piece is, wait a second, I can't wake these people up in the first place. You know, they're going to get to this as they get to it, but there are people who are trying to advance, and we can advance together if we are sharing information and analyzing it properly, and then getting that kind of networked influence effect in the iterative forms of those beliefs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like how you framed the narrative danger, because I think, obviously in keeping with the theme of this show, but that more encapsulates what I'm describing. I in no way believe Trump is in danger. I don't even believe that the Trump agenda is in danger. I do, however, believe that large swaths of the quote-unquote truth community that have built themselves into a brand that interprets Trump's agenda and translates Trump's agenda and the Q agenda and the awakening agenda have been exposed and are in danger. And maybe, you know, it's kind of timely. I'm not going to play a bunch of clips and everything. That's not what I tend to do on this show. But I'm sure many of you watching the show tonight are aware that, I don't know if it was either Sunday or I think it was today, we had this sit down between Trump and Kristen Welker, and that's kind of making the waves. What I find fascinating about this interview that was just chock full of interesting statements from Trump and interesting questions from Welker is this interview encapsulates what I see as the divide in the truth community that a lot of truthers are not willing to acknowledge. And that is that I was talking with my wife on a walk earlier tonight. I said, if you were a normie and you are watching that interview, I'm saying a Republican normie, a Democrat normie, a stupid normie, a smart normie, like a whatever normie you want to pick.
There are smart normies.
There are smart normies.
Yeah.
If you watch that interview with no context of Trump, no leanings for or against Donald Trump, Kristen Welker's questions are inarguably and indefensibly apt. That is what I took out of that, which is now I have my own ideas of what she is trying to do. Okay. So before like the three people get really mad, I'm not saying Kristen Welker totally nailed Trump and he's a retard and doesn't know what he's saying. I'm saying the narrative danger that you just described, that this interview is an example of it. When Welker is sitting down there and saying, you, Donald Trump, said you would not involve the United States in any other foreign conflicts. Mm-hmm. You said this. You said those words. You ran your campaign on that promise directly. And if you go on Twitter tonight, you will see, for anybody that wants to like play this straw man game, Donald Trump did emphatically, word for word, repeatedly make that promise directly to all of you, directly to all of us. That is a fact. It is inarguable. It is a fact. He did it, and he did it over and over and over again. When she said that, Trump basically responded by saying, no, I didn't. Okay? Now, what's strange about what I just said is I am a Trump supporter and do not think he's making a mistake here. What I'm saying is when whatever percentage of the MAGA core or the truth community rush to defend Trump on the back of this interview by saying that what Welker is asserting is false, I would say you have missed the point, right? Mm-hmm. So the last way I would put this, and I want your thoughts on it, I would refute what Welker is doing there, not by saying that she is wrong in what she is saying. I would refute it by saying, I do not believe the story of the Iran war is real. But if you do believe the story of the Iran war is real, you have yourself in a bit of a pickle right now.
Yep.
And that is how I would say that, like, the narrative danger, I think, is a feature. I think this is discombobulation. But I would like to apply the discombobulation framework to the MAGA core on this episode and drill down into what that means, right? Because we've talked about the globalist media, the mainstream media, Normieville, all these different layers of the collective mind that are being discombobulated. But the one that not a lot of people talk about is like Trump's base and the truth community is super discombobulated right now. Not in that they don't know whether or not they should support Trump, but that they will look at a clip like that of Welker saying, you said no new wars and then you started bombing Iran. You can't defend that if you think that Trump is doing what they say he is doing, in my opinion, which only leads you to either Trump lied to you and does not tell the truth at all times, or what you are being told is happening by the media apparatus that Welker represents is not happening. Mm-hmm. So that, to me, is how I would frame. I think you can look at the contradictions, supposedly, of Donald Trump and not lose your mind about it if you think that what we're going through is a much more reality-based, as you would frame it, sort of disentanglement than what most truthers think. Most truthers 3 months ago were cheering for the bombing of Iran, while people on this network, not all of us, but some of us were saying, like, I don't think we're bombing Iran, and I like that Trump is telling a story about it. I think those are two wildly different things. And I think that might be like one example of where this divide is in sort of Trump's base right now.
Yeah, I think that's hugely important. Pull the thing I just shared for a second. This is just CNN today, and there's an article or a headline like this almost every day. Israel says it struck targets in Iran after Tehran fires. Oh, damn it. They changed the headline on me. Hold on a second.
They do that a lot now, man. Every day.
So annoying. All right, hold on. So the original headline, I can't. Hold on. I think I have it in. I think I posted this on Substack this morning. I have to get this picture back. Apologies. Sorry for the delay. Hold for processing. We're almost there.
I think I know the original headline because I had it saved earlier.
Yeah.
Was it the contradictory headline coming out of Iran?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. And so they have changed.
I can read people the original quote that was from that article.
I've got the picture here. So there's your headline. Iran says contradictory positions of U.S. is main issue in negotiations. And that, of course, that's true. There are contradictory positions on all of it. And that's on purpose if you accept the premise. And the premise is false. And so the contradictory positions are irrelevant. It's like operating on two different layers. And I think it's important, by the way, to note that the Iran war's lack of reality is a worthy avenue to go down. And people don't think it is because they're like, what do you mean? Everybody knows it's real. Okay, well, I'm not a person who operates on everybody knows means something is true. Everybody knew that we had a very deadly pandemic in our midst in 2020. Everybody knew that that was the last plane out of Kabul. And I mean, I always find it worth it to show this wonderful, wonderful clip and remind people to watch the effeminate teenage boy. They also really, look at those guys, just happy as can be.
We better get on that plane, Chris.
Yeah, this right here is that's the last plane out of Kabul right there. People are just hanging on to it. Just anything they can do to hold on to sweet, dear life. That was not the last plane, and that never happened. And they showed that on Tucker Carlson, and now people take Tucker Carlson's Iran war coverage seriously. Tucker Carlson is an anti-Semite, or he's the most based and red-pilled person who's friends with Thomas Massie. I don't know, man, but we should be able to step back from these things. And then people will think that you are cheating in the approach. Well, you can't just say that you don't believe this is real. No, I can say that because that is what I honestly think. I am not convinced that this thing is happening because all of the reasons for me to be convinced that it is are sources I know to be perpetual liars looking to take advantage of me, or in the best, most charitable light, people who are operating in the field of deception on our behalf. Okay. And so in either case, there's no justification for me believing day after day that all of these stories are true, or that any story in particular is true, because so many of them clearly are not true. And, you brought the article to my attention a week or so ago about there being no evidence anywhere that the military can provide, or that anybody can provide for that matter, that that there are mines in the Straits of Hormuz. And now only the military would have access to information like that in the first place. And we have had no proof of that at any time, only claims. And the claims are believable because of past news and history and other military industrial complex and intelligence organization and transnational corporation claims about what Iran was and what strategies they pursued for the goals that they mean to achieve, again, translated all through those same layers. And so, we cannot even start the conversation at that point unless we investigate the foundational claims and premises on which people are basing their points. We got to get straight on that stuff, or we can't go to the next level. And people get really pissed off when you diligently apply first principles, and people are like, oh, what are you saying? You know everything? No, I'm saying I don't know any of this shit, and neither do you. Okay. That is applying basic epistemic humility to what we are dealing with. And the fact that we can't know the truth about these claims means we don't do things like support the annihilation of 50,000 brown people in a land we'll never visit.
That is exactly why I found myself so feeling so strange at the advent of the very real and not fake Iran war, is because I was finding myself looking at half the truth community and being like, oh my God, they're horrible. While then people would say, well, if you don't think the Iran war is real as it is being described to us, then why would you be upset about people cheering it on? And I think it is entirely consistent to be upset about people watching something they believe is real and cheering that on, because it tells you something about that person, right? Like, that's how I feel about it. In my part 1 of what I did not think would become an 8-part series on the fake Iran war, my subhead was the following: in a world of shadows and stories, when is a war not a war? And the question that Welker posed to Trump many times in this interview on Sunday was whether or not the Iran war was a war. And Donald Trump continuously asserted over and over again that it was not a war, even though it was real at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I do not believe that's a contradiction. I also keyed in on something else he said, because I'm obviously very Sovereign Alliance coded. Trump said, he described, he was saying it's not a war. She kept saying, you said you'd declare no new wars or start no new wars. He said it's not a war. So she said, well, what is it? And the term he used was, it's a military exercise. And now, like, one way of looking at that would be he's using semantics. He's classifying what we would think of as a war as a military exercise so that he doesn't have to get Congress involved. Like, I'm partial to all of those conversations. I think they may even be intentionally seeded. Trump does seem to does seem to want a conversation going on about who kind of gets to declare war or get the American people involved in wars. I think that's probably part of what's going on here. But I took that a little bit more literally. If the so-called truth community also defines itself under a premise that we are in the midst of 5th generation warfare, i.e. non-kinetic warfare, that is still literally defined as military engagement. This is stuff John talks about all the time. You and I talk about this stuff on the Power Hour, Wednesdays and Saturday nights. Every week, we're talking about literal, codified military exercises or operations that are psychological or narrative in nature. And I think the big divide, not in the American zeitgeist, I think the American divide on the Iran war is just like assuming at a baseline it's real. Mm-hmm. But in the truth community, I think it's a little different. There's a divide of people that have defined themselves on understanding and even believing they are operating in a 5th gen warfare environment without actually applying that framing to anything they are looking at, right? And the reason I brought up the Sovereign Alliance is because what has Vladimir Putin referred to the Ukraine war as since 2022? Every single time a media operative has said the war in Ukraine, he has corrected them in the interview and said, it is not a war, it is a special military operation. Mm-hmm. And to me, that sounds very similar to Trump, who's saying the Iran war is not a war, it is a special military exercise. And, again, you can talk about the semantics of this whole thing, but to me, the weird thing is being in the position that we are. It's so strange to be being attacked by some just for questioning whether or not something is real, almost because people think that by questioning whether or not what Trump is saying is real, we are questioning Donald Trump's intentions. Whereas for me, I'm questioning his intentions, but I believe that Trump is engaged in a 5th gen war, which he has been talking about for a decade now. And it just seems like that's one of those weird disconnects that I suppose I didn't expect. We would still have that kind of disconnect in a community that otherwise talks about 5th gen warfare and information warfare all the time. Like, the number one premise they seem to take into every argument about the news. And Trump's statements is, well, obviously, let's de facto acknowledge that whatever we are being told is true, and then we'll argue about it.
Yeah.
And I would say that if you're in this community, that the first thing you should do is reject that, and then you can still argue about it. And I think have, productive arguments about what is going on.
Yeah. The idea that we have to accept some premise in order to enter the conversation is just ridiculous. I'm not going to accept any of these premises because if I ask someone tells me that they believe something and I have to believe it too. Okay. I can't tell them that there's anything suspicious about any of this. I can't assert that if we are being incessantly lied to and fed contradictory positions about what is happening in a war, well, then it's irresponsible for us to believe any of the things that we're being told because we have no way of verifying any of them. But of course, people come down where they come down. And then if you ask them, hey, how do you know that? What's their answer going to be? Okay, so
appeal to authority.
Of course, well, yes, of course it is, but they're not even going to give an answer because, then they would argue that you have to believe that authority because there is nowhere else to get that answer from, and therefore I have to accept it from that source. Well, again, that's like a layer deeper, and there's still nothing there, and you can dig that hole down as long as you want. There's nothing there. People don't know, and professional people don't know. I'd encourage anybody to, I don't think we talked about this. The debate, the Monk debate, Victoria Nuland and Mike Pompeo on one side, and John Mearsheimer and this guy, I think his name is Stephen Walt, on the other side. And they are debating whether they wouldn't go so far as to call it military adventurism, but it's kind of just the nation building project. They were arguing about neoconservative promotion of war, whether we should have a dominant position in leading a world order and bring these other countries to heel and the rest of it. All of them accepted the mainstream interpretation of these stories as real. All of them accepted the underlying claims within the controlled opposition dynamic. And you could tell that they were saying a bunch of things that they couldn't back up at all. At one point, Victoria Nuland was challenged about some of the responsibility, whether Iran was indirectly responsible through Hezbollah for creating the paragliding go-kart incident. And they challenged her on that. And she had nothing to come back to them with, except immediately went to attacking their characters. Oh my God, I can't believe, what world are you in? I can't believe anybody would even question that. Like, of course everybody should question that. Why would anybody take what these people say at face value just so that we can participate in the story? And the problem is everybody wants to participate in the story because we are accustomed to participating in the story. The Iran war is the real thing that is happening in the story now. And, 4 years ago, it was the Ukraine war, which is still happening.
Right? Nobody cares about it.
Really.
Yeah.
So nobody cares. Yeah, exactly. And so if you just apply that simple, if you just ask that simple question of every story that's going on, do people actually care about this, or is it just trending in the media? And it's just trending in the media. And, you can make somebody care about this story for 4 months or 6 months or however long it drags on, as long as it's the first and most important thing in the media. And as soon as it's not, well, it's gone. Well, is it not happening? If it was important while it was in the media and it's still happening, but we're not being told about it, isn't it just important? And shouldn't you be working 2 or 3 times more diligently to find out everything about it? Because it hasn't actually reduced in importance at all. It's just not exposed in the media anymore. And so we're not being fed the thing that we're supposed to believe at any given time, and seeing where our team comes down on it and whether we're going to side with them very strongly or argue with them, but really weakly, never upsetting consensus, always sticking with the story being told. Like, let's just let go of the pretense. Okay. We don't have to pretend that we know what's happening in a war scenario 10,000 miles away, where the only information that anyone knows is fed to them from military, transnational corporations, and intelligence groups. And the funniest thing about the Iran thing is that we were told their internet is shut down for the first 3 months of it just opened up 2 weeks ago. That's their access to the global internet. So they can talk to one another within the country. They can access the internet within the country. They're just not getting global propaganda in. And I joked, and I'll pause after this. I joked that I wonder if maybe the people of Iran are going to find out that they're at war.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in my other walk of life, I deal with Iranians sometimes. I deal with people all over the world. And it seems that some Iranians have been on the internet during this whole thing. Not only have they been on the internet, but they have just been conducting normal business, as if you would be conducting normal business. I'm in a very weird industry in combat sports, but yeah, I deal with Iranians. I deal with people all over the world, Russians, all the rest of it, all the evil, bad people. Still putting on fights, still doing the things they normally do, still emailing the things they normally email, or the people they normally email. But while agreeing with what you laid out, I would like to submit a defense as somebody who does agree, but also wrote eight articles about the Iran war that I do not know about. But that's to say, I do not think I know what's going on in Iran. But when Donald Trump, this is where I'd like to split the difference of where some people, I think, they hit this cognitive dissonance while with the way we talk about narrative in particular. If we're saying, hey, you don't know if this is real, not only do you not know if it's real, I'm going to write an 8-part series for you about how I don't think it's real. And then people will go, okay, well, if it's not real, why are you doing that? Why are you taking the time to write all this stuff? Why are you analyzing it? Why are you talking about it? Is it just because it's in the news? Well, kind of. My answer to that would be, just like the way you framed it, if you're operating from a, as you would say, a reality prime framework of the Iran war is real, then, or the Ukraine war is real, then you should probably be trying to figure out what's going on in it, if it's that important. If, however, you don't think it's real, I still think it's extremely important to try to figure out why you are being told about it.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's what I focus on. And I think some people don't get that at times. I know a lot of people watching this show understand this, and the people who follow us. So I'm talking in the general here. But people in the broader space, they don't really, why would you spend all this time analyzing an Iran war that you think is fake? Because a fake Iran war is infinitely more complex than a real Iran war, in my view. And the implications of us wielding or waging a fake Iran war are seismic. And to me, very encouraging. But I think some of this gets into, some of the underlying premises. But I guess before I get to that point, I'd like your take on that. The veracity of the stance of saying, I either am asserting that this conflict is fake. It could be Iran war. It could be anything we've been told about over the last decade. Or I'm just simply asserting I don't know if it's real, but I can still spend a lot of time talking about what's going on here in the narrative realm. And I think time well spent learning a lot of things about how the world works, or how our minds work, or how societies and governments work. And I wonder what you think of that, whether it's about Iran or anything else.
No, I think that's the important level. And when you and I are talking, it's kind of is assumed in the back of my mind that, we're making an argument that is totally open to engaging these things on a narrative level. And that, of course, is important because that has implications on our relationship with the government, on what sort of reality we live in, on the information space, on the sorts of things that the people in our lives are being encouraged to believe. All of these things have real bearing on our life at a very localized level. And that's how I think we should approach these things. I need to take care of myself. I need to take care of my family. I need to take care of the people in the broader community around that. And then maybe I can go out into a more public setting and contribute to what's going on in my town or my city or whatever, and then we can expand from there potentially. One thing we can't do is know what's going on 10,000 miles away. People in chat are saying, hey, we have this guy over there. Well, okay. Do you know what's going on at your next door neighbor's house? All right. Sending a person over to Iran is going to give them one person's perspective in a small area of that foreign country that, unless they have extensive experience with that foreign country, they probably don't really understand. And unless they're able to speak that language, they probably can't get the real deal from people on the ground there. So, I get that kind of implies greater authority than people who are not there at all. And maybe it implies that there's some additional knowledge that may or may not be relevant, but most of that is totally irrelevant and not any sort of advantage whatsoever. I often say I lived in California with people who had no idea what was going on in the California government. They wouldn't know what's going on down the street ever because they are so involved with themselves and their own lives and the desires they're trying to fulfill on a given day. And again, that's probably just a more realistic way to understand our total capacity for stuff like this. Being in a place doesn't suggest actionable knowledge of that place, except in context in certain circumstances. There was another question. One of the people in the chat said, well, I was in Iraq in 2003. Was that war real? Well, okay, I guess we would have to discuss what level, on what level we are asking that question. Were you involved in kinetic warfare? Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask him. And I would certainly accept his answer to that question if he indeed was involved. Was all that kinetic warfare exactly what we were told it was? I mean, that was about going after Saddam Hussein for weapons of mass destruction and his contribution to 9/11. So if the premise of the war is already just irrefutably false, well, then you were there to do something else. And so we would have to know what that other thing is. And then, yes, the war part of it, as it was described to us, would be false. That would be a fake war. And then you are doing something entirely different than that is very real. And I'm not disputing. Okay. I'm not trying to tell you your experience didn't happen, but we are being told certain things about what's going on there. And if those things aren't actually going on and something entirely different is going on, if we are, for instance, in Iraq or elsewhere, if the military is involved, and I'm not putting this on the soldiers to any degree, by the way, but if what we're involved in, and we talked about this extensively in the when we covered that movie Warfare on Badlands Story Hour, if you're there to put down a sovereign uprising, but by the people of that nation who aren't big on having a foreign occupation in their land, well, then are you waging the Iraq war as it was told to the American people? I would say, no, you're not doing that. And again, it's not about the soldiers, but what we are being told is entirely different than the reality. And in that case, the thing we're being told is fake. Okay. I don't even think maybe someone has a way to argue with that. I'm not sure what that would be.
That is basically my standard operating procedure, which is why, as much as we talk about reality and narrative and the differences between the two, we don't tend to focus our time, despite what people accuse us of, and especially accuse you of, don't tend to focus our time about whether or not something is real. I think the focus is on the story, and the story is for a reason. One of the terms I use in my writing a lot is actual narrative fusions. I think most things are actual narrative fusions. But wars are certainly one of those things. So yeah, it's an open-ended question that I think people should ruminate on, which is, if you get past the initial question of, is the war happening? The second question is the more operative question. Is the war happening as you're being told it's happening? And is the war happening for the reasons you're being told it's happening? So in other words, like to Chris's point there, if it turns out that all of the kinetic events about a war are happening as you are being told about those events, but that the premise is not only not what you're being told it is, but is the inverse of what you're being told it is. It's even worse to have bought into the war being real, because what you're really saying when you're buying into the war being real is not the kinetic events. You're buying into the story of that war. And, it is a difficult conversation. One of the reasons I've said on Badlands that I respect, having conversations with guys like Alpha and CanCon on our own network is because they're guys who were in kinetic conflict, in war in the modern age, and are now doing shows about retroactively saying the reasons that they were there were not true, were not real. And that somebody, who knows who, where along the chain of command, but somebody that was responsible for deploying them over there knew that this shit wasn't real, right? And that, I think, the intent there, that implies intent there. And I think it's again strange in a truth community, people that understand that our government and our military has been wielded by a deep state criminal cabal. That's like the standard operating baseline premise of almost everybody watching this show. Mm-hmm. And yet they'll get upset if you say, we might have been the baddies in such and such war, right? And I totally agree with you that I would not conflate that with the soldiers who were involved in that war.
Yeah.
Speaking of Story Hour, we also did a movie, another war movie, very recently called Fury, about World War II. And, these are more uncomfortable conversations, but it's worth looking at the stories, especially the most emphatic and sort of accepted stories in the Western zeitgeist before the awakening era, before the Trump era, and saying, man, if you got into the awakening by saying, our government, Republicans, Democrats, anybody in between, has been corrupt for a long time, and they got us involved in a bunch of shit we shouldn't have been involved in, and they're the bad guys, and all wars are bankers' wars, and all the things I see in chat every single night. Mm-hmm. Well, have you perhaps wondered what the German people thought was going on in that war? And, again, this isn't a Hitler bro take, because I think that's one of the most well done controlled opposition dynamic little circle jerks that there's been. But I'm talking about the German soldiers on the ground, the families of the Germans on the ground. There's a great line in that movie that you pointed out where Brad Pitt's American captain, the captain he's talking to, says, why don't they just give up about the Germans? And Brad Pitt's character, War Daddy, says, would you? Yeah. And, like that, it's such a simple premise and a simple question, but these are the kinds of arguments that should be being made. And what's funny about the Iran war narrative right now is if you read like non-truther media, and it doesn't even have to be mainstream media that's anti-Trump, just like earnest, independent media of people that are trying to figure out what's going on, they're sitting there saying, even if the premises Trump is laying out about Iran are true as he is stating them, there is no scenario in which this kinetic situation turns out in the way he is saying it turns out, unless something else is going on. And, it's just, I guess it's just strange that for people that basically will question every single war narrative before the current era, if not invert all those narratives, doing it in real time is always extremely controversial. Mm-hmm. And, one more thing I had thought of earlier on this point would be, speaking of the contradictory messaging that Iran is saying Trump is deploying about the Iran war. If 3 weeks ago, we were on a show and said, I don't think there's any mines in the Strait of Hormuz. At the time, we'd be attacked for saying, but Donald Trump said there were all these mines in the Strait of Hormuz. Well, what does it mean when 3 weeks later, Trump says there's not any mines in the Strait of Hormuz and there never was? Does that mean you're trusting the plan then because Trump has edited the story in real time? Or does it mean we were trusting the plan when we were telling you were being retarded 3 weeks ago? And that's one of those divides as well on a informational timeline perspective.
Yeah. I don't know which way you want to go with that. I agree with what you just said. There's not really a question there, though, is there?
Well, I guess just that you talk about informational time travel in a different way, I guess. But I guess what I'd posit is I think one of the things you get criticized the most about is questioning things in real time because they seem to be going against what Trump is saying at that time. But then later on, Trump himself kind of aligns with what we were saying weeks before. And then the rest of the truth community gets on board with that. So, but they don't apply retroactive framing to what he was saying at the time he was saying it.
Yeah, and sometimes it's years before. And the point in bringing that up when it happens is not to say, ha ha ha, see, I was right and you were wrong. It's not, that's not the point at all. The point is to say, if you were operating from first principles, this is the thing you could have known back then. And if you knew it back then and you actually incorporated it into your thinking, you would be in a different place right now that would be on much more solid and stable, rational ground than where you are because you chased the trending story and the in-group consensus at the time. And that is a really important thing, a hurdle to get past in our lives, because that means that we are then thinking for ourselves and using our own critical thinking, operating from first principles, making sure that we are on stable moral grounds and epistemological ground before we form these beliefs and then go out and act these beliefs into the world, because that is how our reality is constructed. That's how the country gets to a point like this. It's not like just one day everything went to shit. We've been systematically brainwashed from the absolute highest levels with all the resources in the world, the ability to print money, which is the key incentive that operates the rest of the system, because everybody is chasing, not everybody, people within that system who are supporting that system are chasing those incentives and supporting the system in order to achieve those incentives and to earn those incentives. Okay. And so how we form beliefs dictates whether the adversarial system persists. And we don't see it that way. We think that we're going to achieve enough power within that system to then overturn the system, or that we want the system to have this size and this power. We just want it to be us in charge. And so we want to figure out how we can manipulate things in the world so that we can grab control of the powerful system, because then our worldly existence will theoretically at least be better, because then the good people will be in control. But that's a childish way to approach things.
Yeah.
That's not how it works.
It's also perhaps a morally wrong way to approach things, which is kind of really one of the premises I want to get into, or conversations I wanted to get into. I named the episode The MAGA Matrix, and part of that is some of the discussions we've had in recent weeks, recent months about, I don't know if you've talked about this much on shows or what, but the idea of a second matrix or layers of the matrix. We obviously talked about this a little bit during our discussions of the Matrix sequel recently on Story Hour. Again, if you guys are not watching Story Hour, we tend to have, I think, more accurate discussions about reality when discussing famous works of fiction than when we're discussing the InfoWar, which may end up being the most famous work of fiction that we've discussed. The idea of a second matrix or secondary matrix or other layers in the matrix. When we watched The Matrix Reloaded recently, the brilliant premise of that movie is that the awakening of Neo, and therefore the sort of awakening cascade that Neo kicks off in the Matrix, is itself accounted for in the programming of the Matrix. Not only accounted for, but that it's a key piece of the programming of the perpetuation of the Matrix. And I wonder, when we're talking about the discombobulation and kind of where people are at right now that are in the info war, or what they call the truth community or the MAGA base, how would you define the Matrix right now as compared to maybe at the beginning of the Trump era? Like, is it the same Matrix? Is there a new Matrix in the last couple of years? Or is it just that there's been these layers to it all along that kind of operate independently of one another, that are informed by one another?
Yeah, I mean, the only response I would have is that is just the two sides of the controlled opposition dynamic. And I think that there's kind of a second matrix. There's this guy, Jason Horsley on Substack, who has written about this a little bit. Like, you think you've broken out of the matrix and now you know how things really work, but you're just still stuck in that second matrix. There's not like multiple ways out of this thing, you know, and we want to. So we get what part of the conditioning is to become moral relativists, but it's also to become intellectual relativists. And they do that by skewing the language, and they take the meaning of a word and invert that meaning and then layer the two things together so that man and woman are opposites. But then they change it to be a man can also be a woman. So now a man is a man, but a man can also be a woman. So in certain situations, a man is a man, but in other situations, a woman is a man or a man is a woman, right? And so if you are able to compress those definitions, then you can use the word in various contexts in totally opposing ways. And if you do that consistently, and every word ends up being defined as itself and its opposite, the thing and its opposite compressed into one, well, then you can take anything in any direction because all the words have lost their meaning. And so that you can apply that concept broadly to all of these inversions, and you'll see them everywhere. And so I think it's important to just make sure that we're always going back to that natural form and using only that to process these things. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. Well, it actually gets me into the point I was going to make next, or the question rather. One of the ways I've been thinking about this, I don't think is, unique, or I'm the only one who's thought about this, but the idea, almost like, we talk about the matrix, we talk about the false reality. Most people in our audience talk about the matrix on various levels, the central narrative, the mainstream. Like, if you use the word normies, you are de facto acknowledging that there is this agreed upon consensus that you have withdrawn yourself from, right? So positive and negative, one of the ways I've been thinking about the matrix recently is almost like a condition, like an individual condition. Obviously, in the world of the movie, it's very literal. There's this computer program. You're either in that program or you are outside of that program looking into it, that sort of thing. But in our framework here, the InfoWar reality, maybe the way I would think of it is the matrix is something that you are almost attuned to or attuned against. Like it's this individual, almost a diagnosis rather than an objective layer or observation of reality. And I don't know if that's positive or negative, but I guess, your thoughts on the individual versus collective matrix. Like, is there, one of the main things I want to talk about tonight is this idea of both positive and negative, defining the matrix, and then maybe approaching escapes from the matrix or defeating the matrix. Is it beneficial when we talk about the matrix as being this thing, this collective thing? Or is that actually one of the things that holds us back if a pathway out of the matrix is basically individualized, a mindset sort of thing?
I don't know. And I guess that there's maybe a way to think of the matrix that doesn't involve the collective access to it, depending on how you consider consciousness and, questions about like what our physical world actually is. If you go in and even flirt with anything in the simulation realm of thought and epistemology, then that kind of changes a little bit. I guess I don't know. I think that the way, so let me say this about the normie aspect of things. And I think that both of those, I think that normiedom and being stuck in the matrix overlap in that both of them have a mental disorder in the epistemological realm. The way that I will recognize that most quickly is when people are stating things and premising arguments on things. I know they have no way of knowing. Okay. So if you're going to start talking to me about the systems that allow a spaceship to travel to Mars, or the makeup of gases on Neptune, well, I know that you are not operating from first principles. I know that there is no way that you or anyone else have direct experience of the factual claim that you're making about a real state of the physical world. You are telling me that that is a real state of the physical universe that you definitely cannot possibly know. Okay, there is no way to know that thing. There's no way to verify that claim, and so it should not be used. And that is, I'm using an extreme form of this, but any claims that are made about our war scenarios, claims that were made about COVID, it doesn't matter what claims we're talking about. There's an entire class of claims that people will make, and as soon as they make them, you can hear in their speech that they are repeating something that they heard on television, okay? Or something that they read in a book that everyone has read, or they are using some phrase from pop culture or rap music or a reality show or whatever it might be. Well, you are speaking normie speak at that point, okay? You are repeating something that you have not actually analyzed, considered, verified yourself in almost any of these cases. And as the listener, you can know that immediately because there's no way that they have direct experience of that thing and no way to get there through pure reason or first principles. And so when someone is premising entire arguments and making important claims that I'm supposed to then engage with or refute, well, I can't do that because I already know that they have no basis for making these claims. So the only thing to do in that situation is to inquire, well, hey, how do you know that? Like, what is under there? And, you know, there's one of those going on in the chat right now. And the answer was, well, people I know said it. Okay, well, cool. But why would I believe that? And also, why would I trust that the people you know a big picture truth about the claim you're asserting? And obviously, you know, none of that is verifiable in any way. It's not actionable in any way. And there wasn't even the content of a claim made, only an appeal to the people who would then inform this person about what was happening. And that makes it true. And so I know that that person knows what's really happening over there because his friends were over there and they certainly know what's really happening, communicated it to him fully, completely, and honestly in a way that is indisputable and irrefutable. So he definitely knows, and now I'm supposed to believe him. That is a nonsense chain. And that anyone would take that seriously is only proof of the mental disorder that has been conditioned into us.
That gets me to almost a bit of an open-ended game I'd like to play, which is you or me had said at the beginning of the show, this idea of people accidentally awakening or voting for Trump by accident or etc. One of the ways I had related this in my notes to the concept of the Matrix is being able to define what that is, or like, are there signs that somebody is in the Matrix? I guess that's maybe a better way to frame what I was trying to communicate a few minutes ago of saying, is the Matrix collective or is it individual? In this space in which we operate, where we're not in a movie script. Well, some people say we are. Let me try to say this. We are not in a thing where I can look at a holodeck on the Nebuchadnezzar and say, that is the Matrix right there that Neo is in, and I am one of the crew members in the real world. Mm-hmm. We're kind of operating this amorphous environment where just by calling somebody a normie that you're interacting with in like physical space and in what we would call real life, you have kind of put them in a different silo of reality. You've sort of separated yourself. You're like, I am in this place, and they are in the Matrix, even though we're interacting with each other. I think I'm not saying that's wrong, by the way. I do that all the time. I think a lot of people do that. But one of the reasons I say I think a lot of people woke up by accident or think they woke up and they did not is when they cannot explain why they know or why they believe the things they believe, which is a lot of what you were just explaining there. So I wonder, whether this is for people you're observing, operating in the info war, or just yourself. Like, are there kind of mental tricks of the trade or ciphers or processes that you use to almost check, to not just check what other people are saying from an epistemological perspective, but to check yourself at times, and to almost in a way, almost a matrix check of saying, like, am I succumbing to the matrix in some form, or am I not? It's very broad, but it's something I was thinking about today, of like these, and maybe Inception's even a better example than the Matrix. Of in Inception, they have this concept of the different dream layers, but one of the cool conceits of that movie is that each different character has what they call a totem, which is something that they can use or observe in a dream world to let them know if they are inside of a dream world at that point in time. And I've thought about that in terms of the info war. Like, are there checks, are there ciphers that we can create as individuals to be like, hey, am I in this topic on a normie dream layer, or am I on a non-normie or awakened dream layer?
I wrote this back almost a year ago now. Test your sanity every day. That's on the Substack, so you can check that out. But I think about that quite a lot. Checking whether you are in the matrix or not. I mean, I always try to figure out what underlies each claim, and I want to have that all the way down to the roots, and that is operating from first principles. So when as I just said, what I listen for and read for the most is when I am seeing claims that are unfounded and accept on, other claims from the same source, because a lot of this stuff ends up being just a closed loop of these communications. The story comes out from an intel organization, a media industrial complex, defense contractor, politician, whatever it is in that kind of information space. The transnational corporations obviously involved in this, global governance. There's a worldwide agenda that is playing out, and I'm not suggesting that all of it is centralized in its control apparatus, but it is all participating in the same incentive structure, and it's all headed in the same direction. And so then these people in decentralized fashion can spontaneously make themselves part of what the centralized control apparatus could never actually manage to do itself, but still achieving the same ends. And so the information that is produced in that process goes out into the world. People believe it, incorporate it into their own thinking, their own speech, their own action, and then build the world in the image of the thing, of the information they have ingested, and then they will filter it right back into the machine. We're producing all of this information. The information, it then goes right back. I'm writing about this right now, back into the great cloud in the sky, this kind of amalgamation of all the information. Some super powerful artificial intelligence collates and analyzes all of this. And then the story cycles back through. And the people who create the first stories utilize the response to those stories and then adapt everything to get the next round of stories. And so we kind of get into this circular loop. And what you want to do is get out of that and not process the world through any of that. And the crazy thing is, everybody thinks that all that information is necessary to navigate the world. It's not, unless there's already other things about the system right now that we are interested in preserving. And then we would engage that information environment only to the extent necessary to preserve those parts of the reality as we understand it. And we can preserve them, but also wind them down, pull power away from that system, and then hope to reroute those things or just dismantle them completely. Okay. So it's not even about like fully destabilizing these things, but we need to get away from building the world in the image of that abstraction that is being created. Because how I describe it is a conceptual map that does not match the territory. We are having our conceptual reality built from the outside in. Okay. We are imbued with a spark of humanity. We are created in God's image. We are supposed to create our reality from the inside out with our own experience, right? And instead we do it from the outside in. All these influences to which we have no connection at all. It does not have our best interests at heart. It is literally designed to control and exploit us. And yet we construct our conceptual reality as a function of that. And so when I see the abstraction being voiced through a person or written through their words or shown in their actions, that's the thing I look for.
Yeah, that's well said, and it actually makes me think of even how I can engage with Trump's navigation of the Iran war story as still a positive while thinking it's entirely fictional, or at least fictional as far as I understand it. Because to me, what I look for is what is the intent of the storyteller, even that is unknowable to me, to your, you know, if you're being ruthless epistemologically speaking. But I look for what would be the reasonable end state or the projected end state of the story I am being told by this storyteller. You know, if their story was true, where is it going to bring me? Or something you and I have talked about for years is, what is the story trying to get me to do or to get me to believe? And you have very similar framing to this in terms of reality creation, the concept of hyperstition that you talk about. I had written an article 3 years ago called The Change Engines, which was about humans and like, what are we here for? What are we doing? Where's our power come from? And it's, you know, to me, it's just this simple way that many, many different thinkers have come up with this idea of, well, physical reality is it begins always with some form of ideation. You know, human beings think of something, they then act on the beliefs that they are thinking of or forming, and then reality prime changes in accordance with those actions.
Right.
But all of those actions in corporeal reality, all of them, by definition, everything begins with a story, even if those stories are just thoughts you're coming up with or being influenced by. So I guess where I'd want to take this is this. The way I would still engage with Trump in a positive framework with the Iran war is I always look for, what do I think the lessons are that are being communicated like writ large across the world in Trumpian deployments? And are those good or bad? Like, does everybody arguing about this thing bring us to a better place or a worse place? And just right now, using the Iran war as an example, do I think it's bad that you've got the American people arguing like vehemently about whether or not we should be involved in this? No. And then even before we get to that part of it, I think it's interesting that one of the basic premises of the Iran war, that as Trump is translating it, is this idea of dependency on foreign energy sources and supply chains and this and that. And I think if you look for stuff like that, if you look for what if this story was true, what would it be communicating? What would be the lessons that like grade school kids would take out of this if they're reading about it 40 years later? And if you can think about those lessons in real time, it might clue you in as to why the story is being told about it, even if it's not necessarily happening as you're being told it. And by the way, this is a negative indicator too. I often look at enemy communications or mainstream media propaganda and say, if I believe this, what are the implications of believing this? Do I like where that's going to bring me? Yeah. And if I don't, then I'm going to reject that wholesale.
Asked about the Trump communications in the Iran war thing, and maybe we can talk about the discombobulator a little bit. And hopefully I'll actually finish this piece at some point. I'm writing 3 different things right now, which I don't know if you've, I sometimes
it's psychosis, think that it's horrible.
Yeah. Like maybe I'm just retarded. I sit there for like 7 hours a day being like, I'm retarded. And then like, once I hit 7 hours, I get 2 hours of being like, oh yeah. Okay. I'm not
figured
retarded
it out.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I started this piece out initially thinking I was going to call it weaponized reverse psychology. And I think that and the discombobulator link together. And so I expanded it into a bigger piece. So reverse psychology, of course, people understand this. It's like where you're giving somebody the opposite story because you are you think that they're going to do the opposite of what you say. So you tell them the opposite of what you want, and then they do the thing that you want because they're playing opposite back with you. And so Trump does that all the time to every different party. And he makes it so they will react, because everybody who is Trump deranged, which is on the left side of the uniparty, on the right side of the uniparty, it's crazed liberals, and also the people who are totally committed to the in-group consensus around Trump. They want to know, everybody to know that Trump is the greatest thing that's ever happened. You can't question him on absolutely anything. And so all of these are Trump deranged, and they will react in certain ways. And so if you know how someone is going to react to a stimulus and you want that reaction, well, then you provide the stimulus. Well, if you want the opposite reaction, you provide the opposite stimulus, and Trump is able to consistently get them to react the way he desires by forcing the reaction he knows they will have to him. Okay. So if the mainstream media is committed to saying Trump is terrible no matter what Trump does, and he wants to dispel a notion within the broader public, well, he's going to give the media the right thing to refute for the general public. Right. Mm-hmm. And so if he can do that, and so let's say that there's 10 possible opinions to have about a certain issue that are acceptable within the controlled opposition dynamic, Trump is going to make all of those positions freak out about what he's doing. He's going to continue to change his position until all of them are freaking out at Donald Trump. Because at all times, they have to convince their audience, the people in the general public, they're the ones who know what's going on. Trump is stupid and irresponsible, an egomaniac. They're the smart ones who have everything under control. Now is finally the time that you let Donald Trump go and you... Or maybe it's your connection. Did I drop or did you drop?
I think it might have been you, but it could have been me as well.
So
anyway, we're back.
Yes. Okay, good. So what he wants to do is make all of those different voices, all of those different perspectives in the conversation mad about him. Okay. Yep. So he does that. And then he introduces one opinion that is not in the controlled opposition dynamic. Okay. And that allows people to see, oh, wait, nobody's reacting to that thing the same way. That's something I haven't heard before. Wait, is that possible? I'm going to actually try that position on. Because the conversation has been totally destabilized. You can no longer have a dominant mainstream media position if the biggest voice in the conversation is perpetually refuting what the mainstream media is saying, and he's doing it from 10 different angles. And so all of that conversation becomes those people who dominate the conversation going crazy against one another in like this circular firing squad. And that, I believe, is the discombobulator, because the chaos that comes from that means it actually gets fought out in public. And it can't just be about every voice in the conversation protecting their solid ground within the controlled opposition. And that destroys their brand. He's rebranding everything. So everything gets confused in there. And what emerges ultimately as a product of attrition is that none of those positions are actually true. And so the thing from the outside is what people gravitate toward. And I would say that that's the macro picture on all of Trump's communications. That is the big picture Trump communications strategy from like a public relations perspective.
So it's funny that one of the words you ended on there, because in my notes, I wrote down the term bicameral attrition. Mm-hmm. I said, I had a little section here, bicameral attrition when it comes to the discombobulator. And my questions were, what effects does the enemy think it's having on Trump's mandate? What effects is it actually visiting on Trump's mandate? And then by comparison on the system. So kind of a different way to say some of that. But what you said also made me think of, I use the term narrative shielding a lot. But maybe in this case, the discombobulator is less narrative shielding, and it's more like like precision strikes on narratives. So you picture Trump in a narrative battle space, kind of like running behind each major narrative as he's being shelled by everybody else, like you just mentioned, and it's like, that piece of cover blew up. Like he runs to the next one, like a cartoon, and then that one gets blown up, and he runs to the next one, next one, next one, and then before you know it, you can picture like the system systematically destroying the very narratives that it should have, or rather, it should have kept going because it might need those narratives, in the future. Like any one of these narratives that maybe it wasn't using right now, it probably could have used those. I also just thought of like a hermit crab. It's like, hermit crab goes in, takes another shell, dons that shell, and if you're like some rival crab and you start just destroying all the shells, then all of a sudden you don't have a shell to get into. These are the retarded. Well, I am also retarded, Chris. We are both retarded in this together. This is the way I think about hermit crabs and 5th gen warfare. But yeah, I think I that brings me to lead it back to you. This idea, I'm not trying to shit on the truth community or Trump's base. It's more like I think I think maybe a useful thing to address is, I don't think the discombobulator concept that you talk about and that we talk about is very controversial to a lot of people who fancy themselves info warriors, who followed the Q drops. They're like, yeah, Trump's talking about this discombobulator. I think a lot of people that follow this stuff have probably assumed it means something more than just people are confused. There are a lot of people in the info war who are like, Trump is engaging in psyops. And that's probably what he means by the discombobulator. I guess the distinction I would draw, or the observation I would make that maps onto a lot of what you talk about with this is, I think a lot of the people who think Trump is a master of 5th gen warfare are the target of, are one of the targets of that warfare by him, and think they are not. And like that's one of those macro observations I would make over the second term in particular, because I just think the second term has gone differently than a lot of truthers, Q people, hardcore MAGA people who know there's an info war going on. I think it's gone differently than they thought, including how I thought it was going to go. Mm-hmm. You've talked about for years the idea of getting the hose again. I think the discombobulator is like a piece of that, or rather, that's a piece of the discombobulator. But I wonder what you think of that in terms of like Trump's deploying the discombobulator on the mainstream media, and he's getting the globalists, and he's getting the rhinos, and he's getting the Dems and the left and everybody. But like he's also maybe getting you, and that might not be a bad thing if you're getting discombobulated by some of the stuff he's doing and some of the narrative maybe destruction he's engaged with that you just kind of laid out.
Yeah, I think that the confusion and the chaos is the point of the communication strategy. He is, again, I think he's rebranding reality and pushing everything back toward its natural form. But if you just look at, and I know we've talked about this before on Story Hour, but I told you, I think about my friend whose parents they're old school conservatives, mostly establishment, but open-minded people, but nonetheless watch Fox News. And I mean, open-minded in their disposition, but they still like consume the traditional information sources. And they were very much Israel is our greatest ally at the beginning. And my friend asked me like, how do I talk to my parents about like the Zionist project and some of this other stuff? And I like gave him some of the angles that I kind of think were worth pursuing with that, aren't upsetting to people, but just kind of some of the history and whatever. And then I asked him like 4 weeks or 6 weeks later, I was like, hey, where are your parents at with the whole, the Israel thing now that this Iran thing has kind of progressed a little bit more? And he's like, oh man, they're totally out of that mindset. I'm like, well, that's incredible. How does that happen? Well, this is how it happens. If Israel's standing in the world is as diminished as it has been since probably the beginning of Israel's existence, and I can imagine that it wasn't glorified in the way that we do it these days. Back then, if its standing has diminished at this extraordinary rate over the last, I guess it's 2.5 years now or so, nearly 3 years, there's a reason for that. And the reason is because all of these conversations have been provoked and everybody has had to go full meltdown in order to deal with these things, unless you are out of the belief system that forms beliefs on that basis. None of this has upset me. I mean, I'm analyzing it in the only way I have access to, which is as a story. And I think that there are more than enough tells within that story that say to everybody, intentionally, by the way, from the commander in chief, like, if you're going to tell me that Donald Trump has pursued a very serious and austere social media strategy vis-a-vis the Iran war, I'm going to tell you you're lying. Because he hasn't. Yes. Yeah. So why is the commander posting slop AI content about the war that you want me to treat as totally real? Well, until that question can be answered, I can't possibly take the perspective seriously, And so I don't know, maybe we got off track, or I got
no. That's definitely on track of what I want to talk about, because I think that makes me think the word premise comes to mind a lot when I was trying to think about what I wanted to talk about tonight. I kept revisiting that term, and I think you just led us perfectly into it. Right. So even leaving aside the Iran war as the current narrative, the central premise of the Trump era, I think, is something worth talking about from the perspective of this audience, like kind of inside baseball. This audience obviously is here. There's a shorthand here that even with our disagreements and everything, most of the people watching this earnestly are big Trump supporters. Sure. Some of them think the Iran war is very real. Some of them are correct by believing the opposite. But whatever, that aside, I think that just like you said, people being forced to confront these narratives that Trump is kind of wearing as shields, and then he's discombobulating. That's all good. That's positive. But I think in the truth community in particular, one of the reasons maybe that so-called truthers have found themselves discombobulated, in my opinion, is a faulty premise of the Trump era. And by that I mean, I talked about this with Ash on the Blitz that came out yesterday. But I think a lot of people not only supported Trump by accident, but I think a lot of people that are InfoWar people did not have the correct premise of what Trump's intentions are. This is just my opinion of what I think Trump's intentions are, but you set me up for it by saying, pretty damn big picture, you think Trump is rebranding reality.
Yep.
I have never used that terminology, but I've called him a narrative war master, and I think that's a very important thing. I think Donald Trump is going to go down widely recognized, even if he is not widely loved, as one of the most important figures that we have ever had. And I think even people that hate him are going to say that, like, unironically. Mm-hmm. And I guess, to go back to the point, what is your central premise of the Trump era, of his intentions and what he's trying to do? Like, just macro, what is he trying to do? And do you think a misunderstanding of that is at the heart of a lot of the confusion in even people who are Q people or 5th gen warfare people or InfoWar people who think that they're, engaging in all these games, but maybe coming at Trump's premise, what he's trying to do, from like the wrong angle?
Well, I certainly think that they're approaching what Trump is trying to do from the wrong angle, because I think some of the foundational assumptions of what seems to be a belief system that has developed separate from the Q drops, right? I think we need to make sure that we are keeping those things separate. The Q drops are one thing, and people interpret those. Did I just drop out again?
It just hitched a little bit.
Okay, so I was just saying the Q drops are one thing, and people can interpret those in certain ways, and their interpretations may be correct, and they may also not be correct. But apart from that, there is a community that has spent its time farming attention by amplifying to the maximum degree what other people in the community are saying about the thing they've already determined they agree on, so that when they say those things, every one of those things that said gets amplified, and the illusion of consensus among that community is created. And then the people who consume that content will believe everybody knows this is what that Q drop means. And to take it out of the Q space, you can see a lot of people interpreting scripture this way and making the same sorts of arguments where they're saying the book says this, I know it means this, and therefore we are supposed to respond that way. Well, sorry, you missed a few steps. Those are not jumps that you're just allowed to make and assume that everyone else accepts them. And so you keep the actual the text, whether it's, obviously these are not in the same domain, but whether it's Q posts or the Bible or whatever, it's like you weren't there for the writing of that. You don't know every way that those words were intended. And so assuming that you do, and then working from there, well, you're setting yourself up potentially for some problems. So a belief system has developed, factions within churches, different denominations develop exactly for this reason. And so we have a group of people who have interpreted that information in a certain way. And now what is true within that group is detached from the posts. The posts are reference points for the things that they believe. But what's important at this stage is what they believe. And again, I think we've gotten kind of off track I've gotten off track from what your question was.
I don't think so.
I haven't? Okay.
No, but I have so I know you're very thin-skinned, so I don't want to upset you. But I wanted to surface this retarded comment in the chat because I think it actually leads me to my next point and what I want you to talk about. Marine in the Woods, who must be very brave and strong because of his name, says, Chris, I always liked you because you were trying to get to the truth. Yes. Now, I just see you as a hyperbole grifter off of no real convictions. Yes. So Chris is a man I would describe as not having any convictions. No. But anyway, the reason I actually wanted to use that very retarded comment as a jumping off point is because you led us right into it by saying, what we talked about a lot in private chat this week was incentive structures. And to respond to that comment, not just on behalf of Chris, but on behalf of myself, if you think taking the stances that we do on things is incentivized by the InfoWar matrix as currently constituted, that is incorrect. That is actually the opposite. And I'm saying that whether or not we are correct in our assertions, right? So even whether we're right or wrong about how we talk about things, we are not only not incentivized to question the central narrative as it is being forwarded by truthers and Q grifters and on down the line and conning charlatans and all that. We are disincentivized. We lose followers when we have these conversations. We lose money when we have these conversations. When we tell people that elections are fake, we lose support. Now, I'm saying that from a materialistic number of followers, amount of money people subscribe to my Substack, like that sort of thing, right? But I'm not crying over spilled milk there because I do recognize that we gain people who are attuned to the same sort of first principles signal that we are trying to achieve. So I'm not crying over that. But I think that, for one, we are not incentivized to have these conversations. The incentive structure, I'm not even just talking about the internet and the central narrative. I would say the incentive structure of the truth community is diametrically opposed now to the discovery of the truth. Yep. And that does not mean it does not always that it never does discover the truth. but it is not incentivized in the incentive structures of the info war, the truth community, the digital battle space. You have been ahead of the game on this for quite some time. So I'd like your thoughts on incentive structures in general. This is something you observed for a long time in your personal life and in your career. Party of false decorum is a construct you came up with years ago. That's obviously related. Cancel culture, you and I were talking about a few days ago. But even, I'm curious your thoughts on the incentive structures, the recognition of these social and digital incentive structures, and how that plays into the info war, a community that otherwise is supposedly branded on discovering the truth. Why is it, leaving evil aside and intentions aside, why is it that people are less incentivized to do that than maybe they otherwise think they are?
Okay. Let's start then with that comment that you just read. And I think that if you look at the content of that comment, the person is, first of all, upset at the fact that we were challenging the wars in that way. And the Iraq war in particular was what he mentioned earlier. And I don't think I need to repeat the explanation there. But the idea then is that somehow his service was not honorable or valued by the American people or the rest of it. And I've already made clear to him that that's not the case and not what I was saying. So, but that does not, of course, solve the emotional response that he's having. And it is emotional. And again, admitted in the chat is that it's emotional, and admitted in the chat is that he doesn't know. He knows by reference to other people who supposedly know, but I've already explained the fact that unless this is like some top level general divulging secret information, then no, they don't know. And so we don't need to take that seriously, and we can get past that. So the comments in particular, insults about the image, reputational games, my image, he's trying to insult me and who I am, my character, and why I would be presenting these things, making up motivations for me and ascribing them to me, accusing on that basis. Like, these are all like only personal attacks and emotional attacks because there's nothing else there. All right. There's nothing else there. And I'm sorry that this guy has been upset by this conversation, but I can't solve the emotional issues of strangers. And I'm certainly not going to cater what I think about the world to some guy in the chat. Okay. So the idea that it is that I am grifting on hyperbole. Hey, buddy, I literally took myself intentionally off every legacy social media platform. My only social media feed is for members of my Substack who pay because they want it. I come on Badlands because I like having conversations with you guys, and John wants me on the network. That's the total story. Okay. If you think I'm getting rich off saying this shit, you got to be the biggest retard I've ever run into. So, yeah. All of that stuff is just so pathetic. Like, that's your complaint. Really, that's your complaint. Your complaint is you got upset at the thing I said, and now you're spinning out, and you can get over it. And then, if you man up to it and say, hey, man, I'm sorry that I went after your character for getting upset about something totally innocuous you said. Well, then maybe we can be cool. But otherwise, go fuck yourself. I don't care about this, So there's that. But the incentive structure caters to people like this. Okay. Yes. The way to get the most attention is to cater to a lower common denominator that will make everybody happy. That's the game the online grift community is involved in. And you know where those grifters are coming from because you can see them running coordinated messaging ops every single day. Okay. Everybody in the Turning Point USA network, that's what they do. All the DC Dranos out there and all these people, that's what they do. You can see them doing it. Those are where the incentives are. You can see the algorithm boost their content. So they gain followers. Through those followers and through the engagement, they get money. Okay. If I was grifting, I would be pursuing those strategies instead of the complete opposite. Yeah. Well, I used to work in celebrity social media and branding. I know how the system works. Okay. Like, I deleted my Twitter account 3 years ago when I had gained like 35,000 followers in 6 months. All right. And that was for fighting against those exact people. But yeah, I mean, gosh, man, the incentives are social, and the social media environment is the pinnacle form of the party of false decorum, which exists on the build of reputation. And to ascend to the next level, you have to please the people on the next level and be useful to them. And then they need from you a way that you can be controlled and a guarantee that you are always going to do the work required of you at that level. And then you can move up. That's what the grift is. Okay. If you want to know the grifters, follow what their incentives are, follow the incentives they are chasing and the messaging they are promoting, and who is promoting it from the next level up, because everything that they're saying is derivative of something else. I would like for anyone to point out what my comments are derivative of, unless you are like deeply schooled in metaphysics.
Well,
it's hard to take seriously.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. And obviously, I'm responding to that guy. We're responding to that guy. But I think it genuinely is illustrative to talk about the incentive structures, because I think it gives us a why of why maybe my premise at the start of the show is, hey, I think a lot of people watching the show tonight would acknowledge, even if we're all still huge Trumpers and all that kind of stuff and think there's an info war going on and that there's a plan, quote unquote, can acknowledge, including myself, yeah, things are not at the point I thought they were going to be at. Now, when I say that, I could be talking on multiple layers of reality that holds true on. On a base layer, like a reality prime layer, as you would call it, is the economy. Like if I was doing these shows in 2022, which I was, would I have believed, with Trump being back in office circa 2025, that the 2026 economy that I would be experiencing and trying to navigate my family through would be where it is at right now? No, I was wrong about that. I've written extensively about what I think the plan is. The irony is, maybe because I'm stubborn, maybe because I'm really smart, maybe because I'm really dumb, I still believe we are on that pathway. I have just evolved that thinking, or devolved it, depending if I'm right or wrong, based on new information. Oh, this disentanglement operation, as I've been describing it, is way more intense and complex than I believed. But when I earnestly try to engage in that, process of saying, do I still believe that Donald Trump has this plan? Do I still believe the plan is ultimately going to be successful, for the American people? My answers to those questions still are yes, which means when I approach the battle space with that kind of mindset, it makes me re-examine, why was I wrong about the timing then? Okay, well, I should probably learn more about how the fucking financial system works. Mm-hmm. Instead of 10 years ago, I was just reading Q drops and listening to what Trump was saying and going, yeah, central banks are bad. How many of you guys in the chat have talked about central banks being bad? How many of you have gone into the histories of how all that works? How many people actually know how fiat currencies are produced, right? Like, this is just one angle. But sure. The Strait of Hormuz and the Iran war we talked about tonight is a great example of, like, how many of us actually knew how important this pathway in the Middle East was, just besides just on paper. We didn't know. Very few people knew that. I think that's a net positive. And I think it's interesting, going back to Trump's interview with Welker there, Kristen Welker. Mm-hmm. One of the framings I loved in there, it reminded me of my recent show with Ghost about a month ago. We did a show all about Trump and the New World Order and Hulk Hogan and how he engages with these narratives. And Ghost has been talking about, yeah, he's in his heel turn era, like Trump is in his heel turn. And when he's saying heel turn, he's not talking about Trump as a heel turn on the mainstream media, right? Trump's entire era is a heel to most people. But right now, he seems to be in the midst of a heel turn, a seeming heel turn on his base. Like, he told everybody gas prices were going to come down. He told everybody no new wars in the Middle East. He told everybody that he was going to fix the election system. He told everybody all these things that in June of 2026 have not happened. They have not happened at all. Now, I believe they are in process, right? But I also think there might be a method to that that's related to, just how complicated these things are. But the reason I think of that is when you talk about incentive structures, I think it's maybe it's almost like the answer is so much more simple than I ever believed of why is the truth community acting this way? Why are people acting in this way? And I used to kind of ascribe it to or assign it to people being idiots, but I don't really think that's it. Mm-hmm. I think it is this incentive structure thing. And I think one of the unfortunate trends, speaking of grifting, is that in the info war, in the truth community, the Q community, the MAGA community, the incentive structure seems to me to be kind of orbiting around two kind of central premises or two central sort of dialectics. Number one, everything you say needs to, on its face, be positive in the moment about the movement. And number two, you need to pretend you know exactly what is going on at all times, on all levels, even if, and people at Badlands do this, in 2 weeks you're saying the opposite thing that you were saying 2 weeks before without acknowledging that. But that's how I would describe it. But in terms of, you talk about incentive structures, like what do you think, we talked about what the incentive structures are not in the info war, but what do you think they are? What are the incentive structures that you see people following that have kind of formed this, circular loop that's going on with a lot of people?
Well, I think that people are really invested in finally being pronounced as right by the television, so that all their friends and neighbors know that they were right and that they were right the whole time. I'm not joking around, by the way. I straight up think that is what most people are doing it for, and are still committed to many of these positions for. And I totally get it, man. I mean, for speaking out about COVID in 2020 and speaking up against the people in Hollywood who were promoting all of that propaganda, and I knew that they were getting paid to do it. People tried to destroy my life. I was attacked, not attacked, quote unquote, right? People went after my reputation in public. And so if you call that attacking, then fine, it's attacked. But by thousands of people, the incentives for a long time after that, what I wanted to do was prove, hey, I'm not crazy. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I was right about all the things I was saying to you then. And that was like a motivation for me for a while, because I knew that they were wrong. And by the way, just to be very clear, I don't think I was right about all those things. I thought that at the time. And my perspective now is much different. And I am not terribly interested in trying to be right, except about figuring out how to engage a different thought process that keeps our conditioning at bay. Okay. And I think that that's probably the best we can do. And I think that we should be honest and humble about that. And it requires both of those things. I don't think that there's anything to be gained from pretending to know things we don't know and then guiding our lives by those things, or convincing other people to guide their lives by those things, except you can look authoritative. And if you are the one to raise your hand and confidently say, I know what's going on, everybody follow me, in situations where there's a lot of chaos and a lot of confusion, and a lot of people know that they don't have the time to invest in certain things, but these other guys, they are investing all the time, so they know what's going on, so I'm going to listen to them. That's the incentive, man. And when you're talking about, in particular, like some of the Q decoding stuff at this point, we're talking about people who believe that their anonymous internet messiah is returning to tell the world that they were right the whole time, so that they can ascend to become a priestly class, the only people capable of properly decoding the scripture that is God sent. And man, they decode Q into God. I've actually seen that thing by some of these people within the last, 4 or 5 months.
They call themselves disciples now.
No.
Well, I mean, they brand their shows after that, but I don't know if they refer to themselves that way.
Wow. Okay.
We're getting into some weird territory. Yeah.
But that's where it was always going to go,
Yeah.
And so there's the whole, is engaging with Does engaging with Q posts make you part of a cult? No. All right. Just very clearly, the answer to that is no. Just like following Trump and being a Trump supporter and analyzing the stories we see on the screen through a lens of, hey, maybe Trump's not an evil retard, doesn't mean you're part of a Trump cult, right? But that doesn't mean that there's not a Trump cult and that there's not a Q cult. It's just that involving yourself in some way in the belief system does not make you part of that cult. It's not this slippery slope where as soon as you like engage in it all the way, all of a sudden you're like dressing in white linen and trying to do a seance and then have sex with the cult leader. Like, that's just not how it works. But yeah, the incentives for that approach are the promise of being seen as an authoritative figure and a priestly class who is going to divine this information from the higher source. And that's what it is, by the way. It's divination.
I don't know if I can even frame this right, but on that note, one of the last things I wanted to talk about was with the Trump discombobulator. On a very bare bones level, we would agree that however we would define the discombobulator, we would acknowledge that Trump is intentional in his deployment of it. He is aware that he is deploying it. He is intentionally engaging in the narratives in which he is engaging. And again, earlier in the show, I said we often apply that to the deep state. We apply it to globalists, political enemies, whatever it is that Trump has in his sights. But it would stand to reason that Trump also would be aware of the effects of the discombobulator on his own base. And if you want to drill into like the absolute concentrated bunker of Trump's base, it is what we would refer to as the truth community, the InfoWar community, a lot of Q followers, like people that not only think that they like Trump, but people who rightly or wrongly think that Trump is part of something much bigger than a political movement. I am definitely one of those people. I think you are as well. If Trump is aware of the effects of the discombobulator, do you think that the chaotic effects of that discombobulation of the current Trump term on the truth community and on Trump's base, even besides the truth community, is intentional and like directed and a part of what Trump is doing, or an acceptable byproduct or symptom? And the reason to put something else on this, the reason I've been thinking about this is because Trump, very early on in his tenure, and something that is repeated in the Q drops often, is this idea of the slings and arrows refrain, where Trump said, I will gladly take these slings and arrows for you. And for a long time, I felt like that means the media is mean to him. The media is mean to you. Trump is your tribune. He's your symbol, all that kind of stuff. Maybe that's true. But this year, I've really kind of been like, if Trump was being really serious about that and saying, I'm going to take all these slings and arrows for you, I don't think it ever bothered Trump that CNN was mean to him. Like if I'm really thinking about, did it ever make sense that I thought that's what the slings and arrows meant? Or was Trump referring to kind of what's going on now, where you are getting, like, I would call them earnest Trump supporters who are like, dude, my man, what the fuck in 2026? And I don't know, those are kind of two separate thoughts, but is Trump aware of that effect on his base? And do you think it's intentional or just something he has to navigate en route to his end goals?
Well, I mean, at the very minimum, it's collateral damage, but I don't even consider it damage. I think it is intentional. I think he does know it's happening. And I think that ultimately the problem, if I'm right about the problem, and the problem's primarily epistemological one, where we have removed God from the conversation, removed first principles from the conversation, removed direct experience from the conversation. And we are now forming beliefs and beliefs that create the foundation of how we want to operate our society. If that's all from authority, well, then the problem that we have to solve for is to make people stop believing, forming belief from authority. Well, how do you do that? You discredit all authority. and force people to form beliefs in other ways. And the slings and arrows, I think that point is well taken. First of all, I think that there's something to all of the insults, all of the awful memes, the hatred, the media stories, the digging into his past, the trying to defame him on every possible level that he can be defamed. Those are a lot of slings and arrows. That doesn't feel good. I don't care who you are. It is not good to be, even if you are the most loved person in the world, it's not good to be the most hated person in the world as well, because the love, truthfully, isn't real love. You know, people honor and respect and that's all very, and I'm not saying that the feelings aren't sincere, but you know, that's not really what love
You can't
is.
really love Trump. He's
Right.
It's not like it's a family member or a child or, you know.
Sure. Yes. And for someone to say, I love Trump. Well, you're kind of overstating it, right? And somebody would be like, well, yeah, you know, I just really respect him. I find him like really funny and engaging and charismatic, whatever else they might like about him. But the hate is real. Like they really do feel hatred for Donald Trump. Every time his name is mentioned, they define other people by their association with Donald Trump, right? Mm-hmm. So if somebody supports Donald Trump, they hate that person too. Or if somebody does something they hate, they say, I bet that person likes Donald Trump. You know, that is like an all-consuming hatred and derangement. So I think that all of that is certainly real. What was the other part of the question? Because I want
to. Do you think he's aware? You mentioned that it's kind of a side effect. I had said, do you think he's aware of this effect and that could be intentional, not just a byproduct?
Right. Oh yeah. And then I got onto the slings and arrows part of it. So yes, I think that part of the slings and arrows thing is right. I think it's also correct in the way that you are applying it. He has to be in there and say the things that are going to make his own most committed supporters angry at him as well, because those stories also need to be discredited. Okay. Mm-hmm. The narrative constructs that have been built, some of these things, Israel is our greatest ally, for instance, right? Vaccines are going to cure you of preemptively of all disease. We can go down a list of these massive claims that have been built up and systematically conditioned into us over time to believe, and then reinforced by consensus, reinforced by an incentive and punishment structure. How do you get people to stop believing these things? Well, you make everybody, you make the biggest supporters that those things ever had argue against them, and you made all the people that would always argue against those things argue for them. And everybody now has to take the opposite side if you want to maintain your same position relative to Trump. And so that creates so much confusion that people eventually, and these people are hanging on by a thread, like just for dear life. It's like the movie Cliffhanger, right? They're just like, please don't let me go. They don't want to let it go and say, okay, well, I can see that Trump is clearly doing something other than just telling me the truth all the time. And by the way, I think Trump is the greatest catalyst for truth that has existed, certainly in our lifetimes, maybe in many, many lifetimes, and maybe in 2 millennia. Okay. He is a catalyst for truth because of this. And so I think to the extent that his own supporters are confused by this, upset, emotional, whatever it is, I think that that's just a necessary byproduct of the thing that has to happen.
I love that because it's funny, even though the way you ended that, it's sort of one of the ironies. I often talk about this, not on shows, just with my wife, is I'm like, for the people that go after people like us because they think we're not trusting the plan hard enough. Mm-hmm. One of the ironies that I often think about is I think the plan is way fucking bigger than what I would say a lot of these people conceptualize it as. Like, maybe there's a military operation, maybe it's a political movement, maybe all of those things can be true. But when I say I don't think the plan was to install the GOP as our overlords in perpetuity, people look at that as some sort of cynical or dooming take, where I'm like, no. When Donald Trump gave his inauguration speech, written by Steve Bannon, who is no longer popular among some, in 2017,
I still like him.
yeah, I still like him, and I still love that speech. Whether or not who wrote it is like a great guy or not, I don't know. I don't know what the intentions were. I'm looking at the words communicated in the address of "I'm returning power back to the people." That sounds like such a cute little saying, and this campaign message, and something that everybody watching the show has probably repeated ad nauseum. But I suppose I've learned, or I've had this kind of realization over the last couple of years, that maybe the how you feel about that and how you feel about what's going on is not attributed to whether or not you believe Trump when he said that. I bet most people, or all people watching the show, probably believe Trump when he said, "I'm returning power back to the people." The realization for me has been, we don't agree on what that means. And I think, to your point about Trump as a catalyst for truth, I think that power back to the people, as described by Trump, is much bigger and much more literal than I think a lot of his supporters and a lot of truthers say. And I think the irony is that the people who say to trust the plan maybe haven't actually thought big enough about what that plan is. And that maybe the plan is for you to remember your own sovereignty and for us to get into sort of a step change mental paradigm shift, the likes of which we have not had in a long time. And that one of the reasons you trigger everybody, or one of the positive byproducts of triggering everybody on the basis of elections, I think is less to do with elections,
Sure.
and more to do with why are you defining what you yourselves would consider a world-changing and paradigm-altering movement on who is elected to Congress in November of 2026. If that, whether or not we are right about elections or you are right about elections, if you think that's what Trump meant by power back to the people, and you were right, then I have severely overestimated what the plan was. And if you are wrong, then I think people like us have maybe have a more optimistic, shockingly to people, and bigger encapsulation of what the plan is. But I'll leave you with that and whatever you want to say in terms of that premise, that central premise, and how you think of the plan.
Well, I mean, I don't think too much about plan stuff at this point, because this thing is going to play out over and over again in repetition until people get to the point where they are ready to change. And the truth is, you can only change yourself if you can even do that. And that is a constant process. But it's all a constant process. That's what it's supposed to be. You're supposed to be guided by the perfect order of God and trying to live in accordance with that. And that is a moment to moment chore to stay mindful of that. And sometimes that is extremely difficult, and nobody ever succeeds at that with any regularity, but you keep doing it regardless. And that, I think, is enough of its own task. And as I said before, then, once you're kind of in a good place with that stuff, then you can move outward from there. But in terms of how the political situation will resolve itself, I mean, so much of it is a soap opera and an explanation layer for something that is being controlled by something else. The politicians, the people in Congress, have literally no impact on what is happening. And I'm not saying that their impact is minimal. I'm saying they don't have an impact. Their job is selling to us the thing that is going to happen anyway, or that has historically been the job. Trump says he doesn't need the Congress and Senate.
Yeah.
He forced them to pass, quote unquote, the piece of legislation that gives him narrative cover for never needing to go to Congress for money. And so even though that money's already there, the Senate is now trying to pass legislation that is going to fund his border efforts, but they can't be defunded. And so, what what we need to do ultimately is correct our relationship with our politics, not make sure a political outcome is achieved. And, so much of what we believe the necessary political outcomes to be achieved is a product of exactly that same belief system I was describing before, much of it downstream from interpretations of Q drops. Well, maybe not all that stuff is going to end up the way people think it's going to end up.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, man. We could go through that particular element of it all night. In terms of what the plan is, I would like the plan to be handing power back to the people. That is what I see. Less in handing power back to the people. The people have to take that power for themselves. And if the people are unwilling to think for themselves, that is a good indication that they are unwilling to take back and then exercise power in any meaningful way because they wouldn't know how to do it. Okay. But there are kind of other versions of that are possible. The people can be encouraged to begin having these sorts of conversations, to re-involve themselves, to begin thinking for themselves, to begin taking individual responsibility. And if that stuff is successful, then in 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, maybe we live in a different country and we have a different political system and the rest of that. But as a lower order concern, I would hope that we can stop some of the dystopia promised by the Great Reset agenda and put ourselves, at least gain enough parity with the system of control that we can eliminate some of the systemic evil from it. I don't know. Maybe that's a goal that we can be more focused on. I don't know.
Well, it's well said. It reminds me, I wrote this. This wasn't really the premise, but I wrote The Villains We Need in 2025. Mm-hmm. And it was the central premise that Sovereign Alliance characters, including Donald Trump, are kind of, acting as these villains that people need in the central narrative. But that's much more apt than I was thinking about at the time in relation to Trump, maybe in the American zeitgeist. Like, yeah, okay, if it didn't work, if it didn't get everybody on board when he was positively or actively forwarding a vision that hooked a lot of us that are watching this show tonight, to get some of these stragglers, he's got to do a full heel turn and get them against it. Last question I have for you. Uh-huh. I had posed this, and I can't let you out without remembering it. I'd said in our private chat, we're talking about the Matrix and the Awakening and all of that. I think one of the paradoxes or questions I have a lot, including like anchoring what my intentions even are of what I do and what you do, is do you think the awakening process and maybe the escape from the Matrix is something that can be done on a collective level or can be a collective level? Or do you think it's do you think this sovereignty kind of push, this sovereignty idea is an individualistic thing that always has to start from the self and kind of radiate out?
So do I think sovereignty has to emanate from the individual?
Yeah, like, if we're looking at Trump as, you called him a catalyst for truth, right? Uh-huh. And he's visiting these macro effects onto societies. When it comes to the individual, when it comes to the awakening, do you think the awakening can be collective, can be this group paradigm shift, mm-hmm. or not? Or is it both at once? I don't know.
No, I do think that it can be, but I would just say that at the bottom of all of this is the epistemological concern. And at the bottom of the epistemological concern is only the claim God is, and then everything else has to be built on top of that. Man, I forgot the thing that you said like halfway through that, and I wanted to. Can you just
can you escape? I think the way I'd put it in our private chat was, can escaping the Matrix or defeating mm-hmm. the Matrix be individual, or does it have to be collective? Right? Maybe a better way to frame this: if you can escape the Matrix,
Well, I don't know that I can, but go ahead.
Does that defeat the matrix? You know, if an individual can escape the matrix, does that individual require the awakening or the escape of the collective?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that the awakening would be, I mean, if we define awakening in the terms of breaking out of that abstract conceptual false reality, then I think getting down to the most basic fundamental layer of reality and then building back out from there is the way to go about doing that. I would suggest that the only approach is going down to the level of logos, which is represented and embodied in man as Jesus Christ, but that's the representation of God's perfect order. And the goal is, again, to live in accordance with that. And that is a moment to moment process of exercising free will, because in all of these decisions, we can go down two paths. You go down the godly path or you go down the worldly path. And the worldly path is often identifiable by the thing that is probably easier and more desirable, right? But if there's something that's easy and desirable and godly, well, great, wonderful. That's the right answer. But if there's something easy and desirable, but you're worried that's not the godly thing to do, it probably isn't, you know? And then you have to be able to exercise. This is the exercise of free will, is to go and follow that more difficult path. And if your mind is set to doing that consistently, and again, part of that is the epistemological aspect to it, forming beliefs on the basis of bad information, listening to what other people tell you so that you can pretend you know what's going on somewhere else. That's not a first principle approach. That doesn't comport to logos. There's nothing to be gained from doing that. And so I would suggest that to the extent that anyone is awakened, and no one is ultimately awakened, because we know that we do not have access to the highest levels of knowledge, of the state of the true nature of our existence, of what our ultimate material reality is, what our ultimate spiritual reality is. There are a bunch of things that are just way above the level that we can access. So we have to be constantly mindful of that, humble within that, and then just try to be, to the extent that we can get out. We can walk the path in the direction of out. We know what that path looks like. We don't know where the end is. And there's a reason to believe that we are not going to achieve that until maybe we die. So I guess that's how I'd answer that. I don't know.
Such a doomer, man. You're not following the right decoders. Totally. If you line up the correct playlist of decoders, you will know exactly what is going to happen until the next decode, which retroactively changes it. All right, man. Good shit. I think people enjoyed it. Thanks for joining me. What do you got going on coming up?
I think that's it, man. I'll see you on Thursday evening for Godfather 2.
Yeah, we did The Godfather Part 1 last Thursday on Badlands Story Hour. You guys should check that one out. And we are doing Part 2 for this week. I've not seen these movies. Pretty excited. And yeah, people love that. People sent some boosts over from the show last week that we'll get to, so appreciate that. And otherwise, go to imyourmoderator.substack.com if you want to be triggered even more. By the way, I know that most of the people watching this show are not triggered except for that one guy.
It's amazing that people still think their emotional breakdowns online are how they own the people that they're breaking down about.
It's also crazy. Amazing to think that it's also amazing that they think that we think it's organic. Because while sometimes it might be, I definitely do not believe it usually is. But anyway, man, thanks for joining.
Yes,
that
sir.
was good stuff. And I will see you on Thursday night.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks to Chris for joining. I'm going to hit our last couple sponsors, and I'll hit the rants and get out of here and tell you guys what's going on next Sunday night in the place of the narrative. And our first sponsor, our next couple sponsors are ourselves, and then we do have one from Rumble, but starting off with Soft Disclosure.
A long, long time ago, a writer went into a dangerous cave. Because he was on an adventure. More like he smelled like an adventure. But the cave was protected by spiders and lizards. No, it was snakes. Snakes? Why did it have to be snakes? Whatever it was, the raider wasn't scared of it because it was Ghost. The lotion raider. Then he found the golden deodorant. That's not deodorant, that's the towel bar. It was soft disclosure. Ghost had exactly 1 second to switch it, or the whole cave explodes! And then the boulders started chasing him. Run, Ghost, run! Oh no, he dropped the soft disclosure. I got it. I understand its power now. That lotion is an important artifact and it belongs in every household. Visit softdisclosure.com and use promo code LotionWaiter for 15% off.
Indiana Ghost. That might be the best yet. Each soft... I don't know if you can beat Zach. Zach, the lotion detector. But we are putting quite a team together. We've got Tiny Bright. We've got... Well, don't sleep on Tiny Bright, by the way. Got some powers. Hard to find. You know, perpetually underestimated. But, you know, the lotion detector and Indiana Ghost, we've got a strong team come together. I don't know who's next, but, you know, it's some good stuff. So we are also brought to you by ourselves in the form of Gart in, 3 weeks? Holy crap. We're going to be back in Deadwood, South Dakota. Me and Chris will be there. We will suffer through John's presence together. Zach, the lotion detector, Indiana Ghost will also be there. And some other people. Some of this flotsam and jetsam you sometimes see in the Badlands will be there. And a bunch of you will be there. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/events. Grab your in-person or virtual tickets. The Telegram chat for virtual tickets is already bumping. There's like 150 people in there already 3 weeks ahead of time. Those tickets also give you access to weekly on Thursday afternoons exclusive live streams leading up to the event. We did our first one last week, do another one this Thursday. We'll do those, you know, leading up to the event. So you guys are part of that as well. Otherwise, looking forward to seeing a bunch of you guys over in Dakota right before Trump is there for some big Freudian slip, America 250 celebrations that's going to be going on in the Dakotas on July 4th. And before I get to you guys, our last sponsor is our friends at Rumble themselves, specifically Rumble Wallet. We hear a lot about crypto, but here's the part most people miss. Crypto was created so you could actually own and control your money. After the 2008 financial crisis, Bitcoin was designed as an alternative to banks. So instead of a bank holding your money, delaying transfers, or limiting access, you're in control. And if you've ever had to wait for a transfer to clear, you felt that problem. Now, fast forward to today, everyone's heard of crypto, but getting started still feels complicated. That's exactly why we use Rumble Wallet. It takes all the complexity and makes it simple. Choose what you want: Bitcoin, dollar-backed stablecoins, or even digital gold backed by real gold. No complicated setup. It connects with MoonPay, so you can use your credit card, debit card, or bank and be up and running in minutes. Once you're set up, you can even support your favorite Rumble creators like us directly. So scan the QR code or click the link in the description, download the Rumble wallet. From there, you can set up your wallet, tap buy, and you're in the game. In just a few minutes, you can go from hearing about crypto to actually owning some. And once again, the obituaries for Bitcoin were a little bit early, bouncing off the lows. You know, not all-time highs right now, but bouncing off the lows. It was crashing on Friday. It was all over. And now we back up. We back up. But anyway, thanks to Rumble. Thanks to Rumble Wallet. And I will grab these rants from you guys. Next Sunday night, there will be no episode of The Narrative. You guys can join me, however, and an assortment of whoever wants to join me from the Badlands on the Badlands Media UFC Freedom 250 event. I'm not going to be there, but I'm going to be watching it. We are not going to stream the fights on the stream. You guys can watch the fights alongside us, but it's going to be a big America MAGA type thing, a big Trump event. We're going to be pulling stuff up on social media, and I'm going to be indoctrinating you savage degenerates into an appreciation for combat sports and MMA in particular. It's a pretty good card. It is not, as a combat sports aficionado, the greatest UFC card ever. I'd give it like a 7 or 8 out of 10. Some really compelling fights on it, but definitely not one of their best, even though the marketing is going to tell you that. The branding is also terrible. UFC Freedom 250 doesn't work because the UFC numbers their tentpole events as it is, and they are at like UFC 330 right now. So when they put Freedom 250, everybody in the MMA world thinks they're talking about the 250th event, but it's about the 250th year since the founding and the freedom. It's very awkwardly branded, the whole thing, but it's going to be fun. So join me next Sunday night. Might just go live at 9 p.m. The fights start at 8 p.m. The big ones will probably be around 10 or so. But you can join me and some other people to hang out. Either going to go live at 8 or 9. I'm not sure which yet. Not sure if we're going to fully subvert and op John Drake and destroy his show by just putting fights over it while he's live. But I may decide to do that. We'll see. So join me then. It should be fun. Don't think the Americans are looking too great in terms of the fights where they're matched up with foreigners. So that could get a little awkward for MAGA normies if they're like, this should be a big America celebration. It's like, well, a few Americans might get absolutely blitzed by some people on this card, but we will see. We'll wait and see what happens there. All right, we got AJC. JC Bird sent over 5 subscriptions to Sam McDaniel, Lizzie from Boston, J Riz, D Patriot, and Michael1213. So thank you to JC for that. Always coming in under the wire. Much appreciated. Jackie and Bay Theater Dave both rated the stream earlier tonight. Lee Walden said, "Evening, gentlemen. Hope you and yours are well. Please know the promise of America and her promise are still within reach. Your contribution to the cause is not lost on me." Buddy, why don't you just wait? Come here. Up. The bright wolf. Hey. Do you want to know something? Didn't want to know. It's ridiculous. The Boom Diggity. $50. Thank you, Boom. I am genuinely interested where BB and Chris think the truth community would be right now. With specifics, I feel like I have missed this part of the conversation that's been circling back a lot. And, I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation tonight. I certainly do. These conversations aren't meant to like be asserting specifics. It's more just a vibe check. The truth community, even using that terminology, comes with its own baggage. What do we mean? What do we mean when we say truth community? Where we are coming from at times is asserting, or where I'm coming from is saying, the truth community and the info war are things that this audience uses as shorthand. We all kind of know what each other means by that. And yet, we have been targeted by a lot of people in that community, including by Badlands hosts and whatever, of saying, you're not doing it right? You're not doing the plan right. And that is a problem for me. I don't think it's going to destroy the plan. That's what kind of the premise of the show was tonight. I don't think it's ruining the plan. But the idea that the plan was for everybody in a decentralized info war to reach consensus about Congress is crazy to me. So the reason I think it's good to have these kind of conversations is we often find ourselves sort of attacked by people following the Q drops. It's mostly people following the Q drops, to be honest. It's not usually just normal MAGA supporters. And I've said a million times, my most popular article I've ever written remains pinned to the top of my Substack, We Are Q. I stand by every word I said in this, whether or not it's correct. Still worth revisiting if you guys have not read it. But I wrote this in 2023, more than 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago. And yet, the only people who try to police what we say are Q followers and Q decoders, because we're not trusting the plan well. Even though one of their central premises is that disinformation is necessary, we are involved in a great awakening, and Trump is navigating a 5th generation war. But they know everything that's going on, right? Even though they're wrong every fucking day. So, I hope we bring some honesty to the equation. We do not pretend we know everything that's going on, even though we have our assertions and our beliefs. But, I think it's good. I think it's good that there's this discombobulation happening right now, because I think that there is some humble pie being served up to a lot of people who are saying, Trump's going to get in January 2025. Everything's going to be great. It's like, let's not, though. And Trump finally is acknowledging, yeah, I know it's not great, but it will be great. It's like, okay, well, that's a little bit of a backpedal. So I still think things are going well, trajectory-wise. But if you think things are currently great, there's a lot of Americans who don't agree with you. So instead of just like bludgeoning them with decodes, you can maybe say, why do people feel that way? And is this maybe part of these plans that I have been pretending to understand for the last 10 years? That's kind of where I'm coming from, but who knows? EC was here. Do you know how Victoria Newland first came into being? She was an elf once, taken by the dark powers, tortured and mutilated, a ruined and terrible form of life. Quoting Saruman to Lurtz the Uruk-hai before he dispatches Lurtz to hunt the Fellowship, leading to the departure of Boromir in the greatest last stand in movie history. Excellent callback, EC. Envo, this is a solid duo. Can't wait to listen tomorrow. Thank you, Envo. I hope tomorrow you have enjoyed what you have listened to until this point in time. And now I hope you're enjoying listening to this right now. And whatever else I say after I say this. Hope you enjoy all of it. White Knight 126 gifted 5 subs to Freya and Boys, Brian Bubba, Emerald Coast, Misbehaving Irishman, and Team Smooth. Thank you, White Knight. That supports the whole company when you do that. So much appreciated. Jason Taylor Barton used the Rumble wallet that was our sponsor tonight to send over $19.98 worth of sats and said, you guys are great. Awesome show. May God continue to bless you. Thank you, Jason. Had a fun night with Baby Bright tonight. Little anecdote. Last week, I think it was last week, 2 weeks ago, I live in an ocean area. We like going to marinas and being near the ocean. It helps calm my otherwise spastic autismo that's always happening in my mind. So I like being near the ocean. But I was there a couple of weeks ago, and my son observed this other boy who was like 4 years old, splashing in this puddle in a parking lot, which he should not have been doing. But his mother was there, allowing him to do this. So then my son ran over to see if he could also engage in this activity, and I followed him in a marina. And when I was standing there, the woman said, yeah, I probably shouldn't let him in there because I don't know what's swirling around in these waters. And I said, well, just think of it as a natural vaccine. And she said, oh, we don't do that kind of thing. And I said, we don't either. We're on the same page. And what started as just that little exchange turned into her telling my wife that her and her husband were conspiracy theorists that had been disowned by their families. And then my wife informing her that her husband, me, scratches out a living partly by being, I suppose, what is considered by normies to be a professional conspiracy theorist. And we just ran into them again tonight on a walk around town. So now maybe we'll get our kids together. We'll start playing. But just a cool little thing where, we speaking of shorthand, the truth community, I think the reason I wanted to have conversations like this is I think it sometimes runs the risk of becoming a bit of a monolith, a bit of the very monolith that it was not supposed to be. And now the people I met in my local New England beach town, I don't think maybe they're into Q stuff. I don't know that they are, but maybe they're not. They have come to the conclusions that, you know what? The mainstream media is full of shit. Everything is a lie. I am going to work really hard, have kids, and shield them from the system as much as possible. And it's very encouraging for me, especially as somebody who doesn't want to abandon this area. And when I see that, I think you know what? There's one more node. That's one family that we can ally ourselves with. against this bullshit instead of fleeing to Florida to be governed over by Ron DeSantis, who shut down beaches during COVID. I don't think the answer is to flee where we are at, because as Mariodoc Brandybuck said to Peregrine Took during the Two Towers, there won't be a Shire, Pippin. If you keep being a pussy and running from this stuff, there won't be a Shire. Anyway, counterinsurgent, even when the Q drops were fresh, I was pretty certain I was not going to live long enough to see the outcome. This is if you do not embrace the process paradigm. And the process paradigm is something I also wrote in 2022. And wouldn't you know it, I used a Lord of the Rings image as a backdrop. Journey over destination. It's not meant to be hokey. It's meant to say, I think that the plan is much more what I'm talking about. These little anecdotes of like personal, local connections and little bits of awakening, I am starting to see as much more in line with what the plan is meant to be. And that the macro plan a lot of us talk about, and a lot of you guys have researched for years, is visiting effects that we can't see immediately, but that they will come your way in these anecdotes. And I think that's really encouraging. I think the plan has been working. I like how Chris frames Trump as a catalyst for truth. And I get the impression the couple I referenced tonight were catalyzed. I know for a fact that the husband catalyzed the wife, and now she is basically an extremist like we are. But I think he was catalyzed partly by Trump in a good way. So, but I think this is how the plan is really manifesting in our lived day-to-day reality. And that's why, we push back sometimes, even though we have this platform that you guys represent, that you guys are made up of. We are not incentivized to talk about the things we are incentivized to talk about. Like if you saw our metrics of when we talk about things that are not popular to talk about, they drop. Our money drops, our support drops. So there are other people out there who know exactly how to monetize this iteration of the info war, and they do that on a loop every day. But, that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to figure out what's actually going on and what our role in it can be. I think that occurs on the micro and on the macro. So anyway, that's all I got for you guys tonight. Hope you enjoyed the show. Please share it out there. Please hit the thumbs up button if you would be so inclined. It's free to do, but it does help us. Thanks to everybody who jumped into chat tonight, except for that one faggot. Pussy ass, fake Marine ass bitch. But otherwise, everybody else was cool. So thanks for joining. And next Sunday night, join me for a chill stream. Subject yourself to some glorious violence on the South Lawn of the White House. And let's watch our boys get worked by a bunch of foreigners. Otherwise, it should be a lot of fun. Join me Wednesday night with John on Devolution Power Hour, and Thursday night with Chris again for The Godfather Part 2. And revisit last week's episode. A lot of people loved that. The Godfather Part 1. And I saw Bay Theater Dave in chat. Said that he liked our conversation about The Godfather, and he would know a thing or two about that. So thanks for joining, guys. Otherwise, as I always say, and please, if you wouldn't mind, support us either at the Badlands Substack or my own Substack. Go to burningbright.substack.com. Have not put a feature out in like 3 weeks. It's been frickin' busy. I am stretched very thin, but I am working on a feature using a title that is a shock I have not employed before as the title of a feature. Everything I do on Substack is free. That is also not an incentivized business model, nor is it smart. But hey, I appreciate those of you who convert to paid subscriptions over there when you can. You can cancel at any time, but we also appreciate that on the Badlands Substack. And I know all the creators appreciate that. So we are funded by you guys. And part of why I've always kept a day job during all of this stuff in the boom times and in the bust times is so that I can make sure I am not falling into the wrong incentive structures and being like, hey, people liked when I talked about that. People gave me more money when I talked about that. It's tempting, right? You do an episode, you talk about a certain subject, people give you a bunch of money for it. You're like, maybe I should talk about that more, right? You're not even trying to be a subversive asshole. You're just trying to support your family, right? Part of the reason that I have kept my day job is I don't want to be incentivized that way. I don't want to fall into that. So anyway, that means that I'm especially grateful to those of you who do support the work I do, because you never know what it's going to be. I never know what it's going to be. Otherwise, we're all in this shit together. The war is a story. The story is a war. Act accordingly. I'll see you next week. Go fuck yourself.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning